In a vast world full of mysteries, where the unknown hides legendary creatures and secrets beyond human imagination, there exists a special class of people, hunters, elite warriors, explorers, and exterminators endowed with superhuman abilities and the capacity to manipulate the mysterious Nena, the life energy that transforms will into power. They are those who defy the impossible, plunging into forbidden territories and facing enemies that few would dare confront. Among these hunters emerges Gon Freecss, a boy of pure soul and unbreakable determination. Upon discovering that his father, Gon Freecss, one of the greatest hunters in history, is alive, Gon decides to follow in his footsteps, not out of revenge, but for something even more powerful, the curiosity to understand what makes his father and the world so fascinating. With surprising physical strength, sharp senses, and an almost animal instinct, Gon stands out even among prodigies. His journey leads him to the Hunter Exam, a merciless test that separates the weak from the true hunters. There he forms deep bonds with Killua Zoldyck, a young assassin from a legendary family, Kurapika, the last survivor of a clan with scarlet eyes, and Leorio, who seeks to become a doctor. As Gon grows, he discovers the power of Nen, a force that shapes the impossible. From simple physical strikes, he evolves into devastating techniques. But his greatest power doesn't come from strength. It comes from his will. The will to never give up, to keep moving forward, even when everything seems lost. Throughout the journey, Gon and his friends face enemies that challenge the limits of humanity, creatures that threaten human existence itself, and enter worlds where every step is a fight for survival. Hunter x Hunter is one of the anime that has created the most fans spread across the world. Its complexity, construction, and world fascinate everyone. Let's get into the mega recap of Hunter x Hunter, every episode detailed and summarized. If you enjoy recaps, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a like on the video to help this wonderful work reach more people. And to reward me for all this work, these recaps take a long time to summarize, record, and edit, but the result is very much worth it. Let's get to the recap. With a determination that defied his young age, Gon dedicated an entire week to the task of catching the Master of the Lake. The promise from his Aunt Mito was the only motivation he needed. If he succeeded, she would let him take the Hunter Exam. It was a creature that had frustrated countless experienced adults, making the mission of a young boy practically impossible. Yet he succeeded. Using every ounce of his weight, Gon dragged the beast out of the water, to the disbelief of everyone in his village. Gon's joy, however, found no echo in Mito. Her desire was to protect him from the path that took his father away. But nothing could stop Gon now. He was driven by the need to understand why being a hunter was such a powerful calling that his father would abandon him for. After an emotionally charged farewell, Gon boarded the ship that would take him to the exams, swearing to become the best hunter in the world. The other candidates on board, however, were a constant reminder that the journey would be anything but easy. After all, millions of the most skilled warriors on the planet applied for the exams annually, but only a handful managed to pass. Abandoning his post, the ship's captain ordered everyone to get to work. It was at that moment that he noticed the strange ability of Gon, who predicted the arrival of a storm simply by observing the seagull's flight and smelling the sea. The hours that followed proved the boy's intuition correct. A colossal storm fell upon them, leaving nearly all of the hunter hopefuls in a pitiful state. When checking on the candidates, the captain realized that only 3 maintained their composure, possessing nerves of steel. He summoned them to his office to introduce themselves, and it was there that his suspicions were confirmed. That boy was indeed Ging's son. The long-awaited day had arrived. Kurapika, for his part, was there with the weight of vengeance on his shoulders. Years ago, a group of criminals known as the Phantom Troupe had annihilated his clan, the Kurta. As the last survivor, he sought the title of Hunter, to have the means to hunt those killers. However, the Phantom Troupe represented a formidable target, even for the most experienced hunters. Leorio, on the other hand, had a straightforwardly simple motivation. He was there purely for the money. The captain then revealed that the exams had already begun. Each year, the number of candidates is so overwhelming that it becomes essential to filter participants along the way. The storm had served as a natural filter to eliminate the weak. Only those 3 had passed the first test. When the storm's force intensified, a crew member almost lost his life trying to lower the sails, but the combined action of the 3 managed to save him. That shared experience showed them that together they could form an exceptional team. Upon docking at the port, the captain, wanting to ensure the well-being of Ging's son, pointed out a shortcut to the exam location to Gon. The young men followed the suggested path. Although they appeared to be alone, Gon's sharp perception sensed the presence of many others around them. Seconds later, they were surrounded. An elderly woman blocked their way, announcing an intriguing riddle. A correct answer would allow them to continue. A wrong one would result in disqualification. Before they could respond, a young man appeared from behind, offering to go first, with the hidden intention of using the advantage to set traps ahead. The old woman asked him, "If villains kidnap your mother and your true love, who do you save? Whichever one you don't choose will die." He chose to save his mother. Upon hearing the answer, the woman allowed him to pass. She then turned to the group. "If you have 2 children and they are kidnapped, do you save the boy or the girl?" A heavy silence filled the air. Leorio, not knowing what to say, grew furious and grabbed a piece of wood to force his way through, but was stopped by Kurapika. The correct answer was silence. Kurapika deduced that the question was a trick, since the woman had only let the previous young man pass without confirming whether his answer was correct. This meant that the path she guarded was not the real one. The old woman agreed, revealing the correct trail and instructing them to follow it until they found a couple who would guide them to the exam. After hours of walking, they spotted the couple, but the scene was chaotic. They were under attack from a Kiriko, a magical beast with the ability to speak and assume the form of any person. The creature fled with the injured man's wife, while Leorio stayed behind to treat the man's wounds. Gon and Kurapika plunged into the forest in pursuit. Gon insulted the creature to create a distraction and struck it on the head. Kurapika seized the opportunity to rescue the woman, but noticed something strange. Suddenly, Leorio appeared, claiming he had tended to the injured man, but Kurapika greeted him with a punch to the face. It was the monster disguised as his friend. Kurapika had no way of knowing it was an imposter, but acted on instinct as he couldn't believe Leorio would abandon an injured man. The beast escaped again until Gon managed to locate it and gave chase. The Kiriko tried to retaliate for the blow, but Gon realized that this was not the same one as before. Shocked by the boy's perception, the creature called for its husband. For years, no one had been able to notice that they were, in fact, a family of Kirikos. It was then that the young men understood the old woman's instruction. She had said they would see a couple, but never specified that it would be a human couple. With that, they passed yet another test, and the Kirikos themselves guided them to the next phase. The designated location for the start of the hunter exams was a tunnel stretching into the darkness, already crammed with hundreds of hopefuls. Everyone there had overcome trials of every kind to reach that point, and each wore an identification number pinned to their chest. It was in this atmosphere of latent tension that an individual named Tompa approached to greet them. He had an experienced look about him, recognizing the newcomer's inexperience. After all, he himself had been trying to pass the exam for 35 years, without success. With the air of a veteran, he offered them a brief rundown of some of the candidates he had encountered before, but made a point of emphasizing that none compared to Hisoka. As a sinister calling card, the magician made another participant's arms disappear with a subtle touch, simply because they had bumped into each other. Hisoka could have passed the previous year, but his disqualification came after he nearly killed an examiner. To ease the tension for the newcomers, Tompa offered them a soft drink. What they didn't know was that his kindness was a ruse. The drink contained a powerful laxative. However, as soon as they tasted it, they spat it out immediately. Gon's upbringing in the mountains had gifted him with the ability to detect any spoiled food. With his plan foiled, Tompa moved on in search of other newcomers to deceive, taking sadistic pleasure in seeing new candidates be eliminated because of him. It was then that a boy who had indeed drunk the juice asked him if he had more. He grabbed another can and with unsettling calm said, "Don't worry, I'll be fine. I'm immune to poisons." That was how they met Killua. Finally, the moment arrived. A massive gate swung open, revealing the first examiner who would conduct the test. Before giving the signal to start, he made a point of reminding everyone that they could suffer serious injuries or even meet their death at each stage. With the warning given, the exam began. The task was simple: follow him to the next location. However, the examiner progressively increased the pace. The journey was mentally exhausting, as the uncertainty about the distance and time they would have to run weighed on everyone. It was not merely a test of physical endurance, but also of mental fortitude. 2 hours passed in the relentless run. The tunnel floor was already marked by candidates who had collapsed, completely exhausted and unable to take another step. Leorio, cursing himself for having come in a suit and tie, continued running with difficulty. Killua glided effortlessly on his skateboard until Gon caught his attention. He put the skateboard away for a while to run beside him and get to know each other better. However, Gon stopped when he noticed that Leorio was falling behind. The two locked eyes for a moment until Leorio, wounded in his pride, declared that he would not be left behind by mere children and resumed running with renewed energy. Gon helped him, carrying his briefcase, and the young men pressed on. After 80 kilometers, the examiner accelerated even further. Leorio, now without his jacket and tie, continued to struggle. Observing his friend's determination, Kurapika found it hard to believe that Leorio's motivation was purely money. He told Leorio that, although he could be clumsy, a fool, and rude, he did not seem like a superficial person. Leorio refused to talk about it, so Kurapika decided to open up first. He recounted how his clan was massacred because of the scarlet eyes, a unique trait that made their eyes shift to a vivid crimson when their emotions intensified. Those eyes fetched an extremely high price on the black market. The criminals had murdered his entire clan, leaving each body without its eyes. Kurapika confessed that he could still hear and see the pain his kinsman felt on that night. Moved by the story, Leorio revealed his own truth. "I only want money because, if I had it, my friend would still be alive." He told the story of a curable illness whose treatment cost a fortune. Since that day, his dream had been to become a doctor, to help people without resources, but medical school required an exorbitant amount of money, and he would do whatever was necessary to obtain it. Killua, on the other hand, claimed he was there simply because the exam seemed like a fun experience. Upon hearing Gon's reason, he laughed, finding it curious that someone would want to become a hunter like the father he had never met. Despite everything, they were the first to arrive at the end of that stage, followed closely by Kurapika, Leorio, and the others. But the challenge was far from over. To reach the second exam, they would need to cross a treacherous swamp teeming with animals of every kind. Most of these creatures specialized in hunting humans, using deception as their primary weapon, making that stretch of the route extremely dangerous. It was then that a man appeared, accusing the examiner of being an imposter, a man-faced ape trying to lure them into a trap set by his tribe. Without hesitating, Hisoka attacked both men, the accuser and the examiner. The first fell dead, while the second survived the attack. With that, the identity of the true examiner was proven. Real examiners are also hunters, making it impossible for one of them to die from a simple card throw. After the incident, the exam resumed. They needed to follow the examiner through the swamp. Losing sight of him would mean certain death. The mist, previously a mere nuisance, thickened with every step, becoming a white wall that barely allowed them to see the figure walking just ahead. It was Killua who suggested to Gon that they speed up, aware of the imminent danger of remaining in Hisoka's vicinity. Elsewhere, Leorio and Kurapika watched helplessly as the group they were following was swallowed by the fog. Suddenly, floating fangs emerged from the mist. Surrounding them, they were the jaws of a gigantic carnivorous turtle. What followed was a desperate race for their lives, but the creatures were too numerous. Another group of lost candidates succumbed to the spores of poisonous mushrooms, while others fell into a trance under the hypnosis of a seemingly harmless butterfly. A crow, masterful at imitating the examiner's voice, led more and more people into deadly traps. No one seemed capable of escaping the swamp's constant snares. Even Gon and Killua fell victim to a patient toad, which swallowed them both in one gulp. Luck, however, was on their side. Killua still had one of the laxative-laced soft drink cans, and just a few steps later, the toad vomited them back onto the path. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, Leorio and Kurapika had managed to escape and were now witnessing a group of candidates set an ambush for Hisoka. With chilling calm, he offered one of them his life, on the condition that he never attempt the exam again. The man accepted, but Hisoka declared that he had no intention of returning. He would pass that year. With a single card throw, he eliminated all of them except one, whom he left alive only to drive 2 more cards into his skull. Continuing on his way, he sensed the presence of the young men and began slowly approaching them. Knowing they had no chance whatsoever, they ran in opposite directions. Hisoka applauded the smart decision, but noticed that Leorio had returned. Unable to flee after what he had witnessed, he charged at Hisoka with a club in hand. The magician was about to kill him when something struck him in the face. It was Gon's fishing rod. Finding the weapon original, Hisoka tried to take it from him. Leorio, in an act of courage, defended his friend, but received a devastating blow. Gon attempted to attack again without success. Hisoka grabbed him by the throat, holding him in the air for a moment before releasing him. He announced that he would not kill either of them. His words were, "You both pass." A communicator sounded, requesting his presence at the second phase, and he departed. Shortly after, Kurapika found them. While discussing what had happened, they tried to decipher what Hisoka meant by "you both pass." Kurapika theorized that Hisoka, being someone born with extraordinary talent, felt drawn to others with potential. Perhaps he had sensed in Gon and Leorio the spark necessary to become great hunters. That was what he was referring to, and that was why he let them live. Thanks to the fact that Hisoka had carried Leorio all the way to the end of the swamp, and Gon's ability to follow his cologne scent, the young men finally arrived at the second phase. The second exam, overseen by Menchi and Buhara, consisted of cooking. It seemed a simple enough task, but the odds were that fewer than 10 candidates would pass. The mission was to enter the forest, hunt a pig, bring it back, and prepare it in a way that pleased both examiners. What the candidates did not know was that the pigs in that region were wild and carnivorous. Risking their lives, they managed to hunt the animals. For Buhara, anything was edible, but Menchi, an extremely demanding examiner, refused to accept any of the dishes, hating the flavor of every pig she tried. As a result, all of them, absolutely every last one, were eliminated. It was then that from the skies, the chairman of the Hunter Association himself, Isaac Natero, made his appearance. He intervened, stating that she could not eliminate all the candidates. Menchi heeded the order and proposed an easier test. Well, someone still ended up dying, but it was still easier. Those who passed understood the lesson. It was crucial that a hunter know how to obtain food and cook it with the available resources. At this point, only 42 candidates remained. Chairman Natero decided to transport them to the next exam in his airship. Normally, he only appeared at the final phase, but the circumstances of the last exam had forced him to show up earlier. They would arrive at their destination at 8 in the morning. Until then, they were free to do as they wished. Among the examiners, the conversation revolved around who might be the winner that year. The consensus was that Hisoka was the most prepared. It was said that hunters are neither vigilantes nor angels tasked with bringing justice to the world. However, that magician possessed an affinity with darkness deeper than that of any other hunter. Speaking of darkness, Gon asked Killua about his family. He revealed that his parents were assassins. His entire family was dedicated to the craft of killing, and everyone expected that one day Killua would become a great assassin like them. However, Killua desired to live his own life. His decision broke his family's heart, as they longed to see him follow in their footsteps. Before running away from home, he had inflicted serious wounds on his mother and one of his brothers. He didn't know whether they had died from the blood loss, but stated that if they came looking for him, he planned to kill them and collect the bounty on their heads. It was Chairman Natero himself who found them. For some reason, a strong tension emanated between the old man and Killua, which led the chairman to propose a game. If the young men could defeat him, he would name them hunters on the spot. The objective was simple: take the ball from his hands. Natero would limit himself to defending, with no counterattacks. Killua started with an assassin technique, the Snake Awakening, creating multiple images of himself to confuse his prey. It was an impressive feat that he had mastered such a skill at his age, but upon trying to grab the ball, he failed. He then delivered a kick to the old man's leg, only to feel more pain than his target. If Natero had been an ordinary man, the bone would have shattered. It was Gon's turn, and he opted for a frontal attack, managing to surprise him, but he ended up hitting his head on the ceiling. Natero then allowed them to attack simultaneously. Gon surprised him again, kicking a shoe in his direction while Killua did the same with the other. For a moment, the old man lost control of the ball, but with an explosion of speed, he recovered it. Killua recognized the futility of the situation. The old man hadn't even used both hands. They could keep going for hours and never succeed. He decided to give up, but Gon wanted to continue. Although he knew Killua was right, he set a new goal. He would only play until Natero was forced to use his other hand. Furious, Killua withdrew, and on his way out, he claimed the lives of 2 candidates. Gon persisted in his attempts until, in a clever move, he finally managed to make the old man use his other hand, and so they arrived at the third phase, stranded at the top of an enormous tower. The only condition to pass was to reach the base of the tower alive within a 72-hour time limit. Descending along the sides was a death sentence. A professional climber among the candidates tried his luck but hadn't counted on the beasts that inhabited the walls and met a swift end. The hours dragged on, and they noticed that the number of competitors at the top was gradually diminishing. That was when Gon discovered 5 hidden doors. They only opened once, and only one group could pass through each one. Deciding to let fate act, they temporarily said their farewells and each chose a door, only to discover that all of them led to the same place. The examiner explained that to advance along that path, the presence of 5 people was mandatory, since all decisions would be made by vote. One member's selfishness would result in the failure of all. And from the 5th door, Tompa tumbled in. Each person received a wristband, and the first door appeared. The group would vote on whether to open it or not. They advanced little by little until the examiner spoke again. Before them were prisoners. Each member of the group would have to fight one of them one-on-one. 3 victories would be needed to pass. Tonpa volunteered to fight first, hoping they would trust him again. His fight would be against Bendo. A fight to the death was proposed, and Tonpa accepted. Both took their fighting stances. The fight began, but Tonpa surrendered instantly. His interest was never in passing the exam. He was there purely for the sadistic pleasure of watching newcomers be eliminated because of him. The young men wanted to smash his face in, but they couldn't afford to waste time on him. Gon's turn came, facing Sedokan. The latter, not wanting to fight, proposed a game. Each would have a candle, and the first to let his go out would lose. He presented a long candle and a short one. Trusting Gon's instinct, they opted for the long candle. Both lit theirs, but suddenly Gon's candle erupted into flames like a torch. The wax was melting like water. It was a trap. The candle was soaked in oil. Gon realized his candle would be consumed within seconds, but noticed that the flame was not delicate. In a swift move, he ran toward his opponent and blew out his candle. Kurapika would be next. His rival displayed on his chest the number of people he had killed, and would only fight if it was to the death. Kurapika accepted. He dodged the first blow, but when he turned, his world stopped. Tattooed on the prisoner's back was the symbol of the Phantom Troupe, the killers of his clan. Kurapika's fury was so overwhelming that the color of his eyes shifted to a brilliant scarlet. He lifted the man by the throat and struck him with a single blow. His thirst for revenge had led him to meticulously study the Phantom Troupe's tattoo, and he realized that this one was fake, so he merely warned the man that if he saw him again, he would kill him. Kurapika then revealed that every time he sees a spider, even one that seems harmless, his emotions spiral out of control, his eyes change color, and he loses his reason, becoming a violent person. This showed him that his hatred for them remained intact despite the passage of time, and he was glad of it, because it meant his will for vengeance was as deep as the day it all happened. While Leorio prepared for the next confrontation, a standoff arose. The battle could not begin until Kurapika's adversary admitted defeat, but the man, with his will to fight completely drained, refused to do so. During this tense wait, Hisoka continued his descent of the tower, only to be intercepted by someone seeking revenge, a face from the previous exam, determined to settle a score for having nearly been killed. 4 knives flew in his direction. Hisoka's speed was superhuman, but his opponent, already holding the title of Hunter, managed to wound him. For a moment, revenge seemed possible, but then the magician caught the knives out of the air, and it was all over. Hisoka was the first to complete that phase. Up above, the young men continued waiting, until a suspicion began to form. What if the man was only pretending to be unconscious? After all, the objective of the prisoners was to delay them as long as possible. It was then that Leorio had a brilliant and macabre idea. He picked up the limp body and threatened to throw it into the abyss. If the fall killed the man, Leorio would lose the round. If he was already dead, the group would win. A cold sweat broke on the prisoner's brow. He had only been ordered to remain still. The instant Leorio let go of him, he reacted, shouting his surrender. Finally, the exam could continue. The score stood at 2-1 in favor of the young men, and the team's victory was in Leorio's hands. His opponent was a woman who proposed a wager. He would have to guess her gender. For Leorio, the answer was obvious, but in a move of cunning, he bet that she was a man, deliberately losing so he would have the pretext of examining her body to verify the defeat. And so it was, though despite the outcome, Leorio showed no regret. One battle still remained. In rock, paper, scissors, Leorio lost again. The score was now tied at 2-2, with only 10 hours left to secure the final victory and reach the base of the tower. His last opponent was a mass murderer whose hand strength was something surreal. Killua then stepped forward. Accepting the challenge, He was ready to fight to the death. With a speed that defied perception, Killua ripped the assassin's heart right out of his chest. It was a movement so fast that the man died seconds later upon realizing what had happened. The young men could advance. Killua showed them how he had accomplished such a feat, altering the shape of his hands, transforming them into lethal claws. Little by little, other candidates were reaching the end of the phase, and the group realized they were falling behind. A vote was called. 2 paths, one long and difficult, the other short and easy. The second option was exactly what they needed, but it only fit 3 people. The long path, taking 45 hours, was unworkable as they had no more time. They were forced to choose the short path. All around, they noticed an abundance of weapons. Tompa, in an act of betrayal, tried to kill Leorio, who managed to defend himself. Fighting became the only option for everyone. More candidates completed the phase, and among those who emerged from the short and easy path were only Gon, Killua, and Kurapika, but right behind them appeared Leorio and Tompa. They had chosen the long and difficult path, only to use the weapons and break through the wall, cutting across to the shortcut. The team remained together, but the omen of bloody and savage battles among them hung in the air. The examiner congratulated everyone for having escaped the trick tower. From that point on, only 2 phases remained, and the next would be on Zevel Island. There, each participant received a plate with a number, their target, which corresponded to the number another candidate wore on their chest. The objective was to steal the target's plate to earn 3 points. Knocking them out, scaring them, or killing them, the means did not matter. Keeping one's own plate until the end was worth another 3 points. Only 6 points were needed to pass. Extra plates were worth 1 point each. In that game, each participant was simultaneously hunter and prey. Immediately, everyone hid their plates to make the hunt more difficult. They were brought to the island one by one, so that no one would know the location of the others. The exam would last 7 days. Gon's target was Hisoka. Drawing on their last encounter, he began devising a strategy, knowing he would need an element of surprise. Suddenly, he witnessed a fight between 2 hunters. An archer managed to neutralize his rival with a sleeping dart and stole his plate. Gon decided to adopt the same stealthy approach. He trained relentlessly with his fishing rod, aware that he would only have one chance to hook Hisoka's plate. However, in his obsession with his target, Gon forgot a crucial detail. He was also someone else's prey. A full day had already passed on the island. Gon sought inspiration from a bird attacking a fish to figure out the best way to capture a moving target. The strategy was set. He needed to attack Hisoka at the exact moment the magician went after his own prey. Now, the only task remaining was to find him. The training had been so intense that his hand had begun to bleed, a detail that attracted some butterflies. It was then that he remembered that Hisoka also had butterflies circling him, on account of the blood on his shoulder. Recalling the magician's wound, Gon used the insects as a guide to track his location, and so he finally found him, beginning a silent and patient stakeout. Meanwhile, in another part of the island, Leorio came across Tompa. Tompa showed him his own target's number to prove he was not there to hunt him. The excuse was a severe stomachache. He had sought out Leorio, having heard something about medicine. The proposal was simple. If Leorio gave him a pill, he would provide information about Leorio's target. Leorio accepted the deal. It was revealed that his objective was Panzu, a girl specializing in toxins whose attack strategy relied on the use of traps. The information seemed useful to Leorio, who opened his briefcase to retrieve some pills. In that moment of distraction, a swift monkey snatched his identification plate. It was yet another of Tompa's traps. He had allied himself with another candidate. The 2 fled, but were stopped by Kurapika. They immediately gave chase to Tompa's accomplice, and once they caught him, Leorio recovered his plate. By a stroke of luck, Tompa was Kurapika's target. Since Tompa still had his own plate on him, Kurapika had already accumulated the 6 points needed. The monkey boy's plate was worth 1 extra point for both of them, so the mission now was to find Leorio's target. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon. Gon continued his vigil over Hisoka until another candidate appeared on the scene. This was exactly what Gon had been waiting for. He only needed to wait for Hisoka to kill the man so he could grab his plate. However, the opponent was already half dead. His only desire was to have a dignified death in combat against Hisoka. The magician refused to fight, but his companion killed the man in his place. Since he already had 6 points, he saw no need to bother picking up the plate from the body. Removing the needles that altered his appearance, his face changed, and he buried himself to sleep until the end of the exam. As dusk advanced, Hisoka spotted Leorio and Kurapika and peacefully asked for their plates. He needed just 2 more points to pass. Kurapika, however, only offered him 1 plate worth 1 point. If he wanted the rest, he would have to fight. To conserve his strength, Hisoka accepted. Gon realized that his prey now needed just 1 more plate. If the next opponent also surrendered without fighting, he would lose his opportunity. Suddenly, the magician's bloodlust erupted like a wildfire. Fear took hold of Gon. He just wanted it all to be over. At dawn, he saw in Hisoka's eyes that the desire to kill still burned. He knew the magician would eliminate whoever crossed his path next, whoever it might be. The wait ended when a new target appeared. The moment Hisoka was about to deliver the killing blow, Gon cast his line, hooked the plate, and escaped. The fear and relief were so overwhelming that he dropped his guard, and the person who had been stalking him all along struck him in the neck with a sleeping dart. The hunter took all his plates and left, only to drop dead moments later as he was Hisoka's target. Since the magician already had enough plates, he decided to leave his own for Gon, along with the one that belonged to him, so that Gon would have the 6 points needed. A recognition of his skill. Gon refused the gesture, but Hisoka brushed him off, making it clear that he was not yet worth killing. It was only for that reason that he was letting him live. Reunited with his friends, Gon and the others joined forces to find the 1 plate Leorio was still missing. There were 4 possible scenarios. The girl was alive with her plate, she had already lost it, she was unconscious with the plate, or she was simply dead. Gon used the power of his sense of smell to track chemical compounds, hoping to find her. His nose led them to a cave. Leorio decided to enter alone. Inside, he saw someone sitting, and beside them, the body of his target. However, he was warned that all who entered could no longer leave. Outside, the young men heard Leorio shout for them not to come in. Ignoring the warning, they entered and found their friend covered in snake bites. The venom was not lethal on its own, but the number of bites could kill him. Ponzu explained that he had fallen into the trap. The person sitting was Bourbon. Before dying, he had set a trap with snakes to poison anyone who tried to escape. It turned out he was Ponzu's target. When she saw him enter the cave, she filled him with sleeping gas, but when she tried to grab his plate, she fell into Bourbon's last trap. She showed them that she had bees ready to attack if anything happened to her. The only option seemed to be waiting for the end of the exam for the examiners to come and rescue them. But that would mean not only the failure of everyone, but also Leorio's death. However, Gon had an idea. Sacrificing himself for the group, he grabbed Bourbon's body. All the snakes surrounded him, but he didn't stop until he found the antidote. With the antidote in hand, he passed it to Kurapika before succumbing to the venom now coursing through his veins. Kurapika acted quickly, injecting the life-saving substance into both Leorio and Gon. Once he recovered, Gon asked Ponzu whether she had more of the sleeping gas. The plan was to use it to anesthetize the snakes and ensure a safe escape. The process would take 5 minutes to put all the creatures to sleep, but time was a luxury they could not afford. With iron determination, Gon decided to hold his breath throughout the entire process, carrying them out of the cave one by one. And that was how they managed to escape. Before leaving, he left Bourbon's plate with the still unconscious girl so that she could earn 3 points, but took her plate to give to Leorio. In this way, the group managed to overcome yet another trial. Before the final stage began, the director made a point of speaking individually with each of the remaining candidates. In his exchange with Hisoka, it became clear that his only motivation was to obtain a hunter's license so he could kill without facing legal consequences. Up to that point, Killua was the prospect who had captured his attention the most. And for now, the last person he wanted to fight was Gon, not out of fear, but simply because he felt the time was not yet right to kill him. The other competitors agreed that Hisoka was, by far, the most dangerous among them. With that information in hand, the director organized the final tournament, balancing the matchups according to each person's abilities. To pass, only a single victory was needed. The loser would advance in the bracket. Whoever failed to win a single battle would be eliminated, and the rest would pass. The first battle pitted Hanzo against Gon. The only way to win was by forcing the opponent to submit. Killing would result in immediate disqualification. Gon tried to use his speed, but Hanzo struck him as though swatting a mosquito. The force of the impact was so great that his brain seemed to rattle inside his skull. Hanzo tried to convince him to surrender, striking him relentlessly for hours. By this point, Leorio already feared for his friend's life, but Gon was prepared to keep fighting. Hanzo warned him that he would break his arm if he didn't give up. Gon held firm in his refusal, and Hanzo made good on his promise. With one arm out of commission, his chances dropped drastically, or so it seemed, for he still managed to connect a kick. Faced with this, Hanzo decided he would cut off his legs, but stopped when the boy made him realize that if he did, he would bleed out and die. Frustrated, Hanzo would not give in, but neither would Gon, for he had a clear objective in mind. It was not about pride. Gon was willing to do whatever it took to become a hunter and in doing so be able to meet his father. He felt that if he gave up now, he would never find him, so there was not the slightest possibility of him surrendering. The boy's determination was so powerful that it caused Hanzo himself to submit, concluding that it would be easier to make his next opponent give up. Gon did not want to accept a victory that way, but Hanzo knocked him out with a blow to the face so he would simply accept it. And so, Gon passed. In his delirium, Gon found himself climbing an immense structure. At the top, he spotted a hunter, but before he could reach him, he plummeted into the darkness and woke up. The examiner informed him that he was in a waiting room. He had remained unconscious for a full day. The final phase had already concluded. He congratulated him on officially becoming a hunter and handed him his license. Aware of Gon's dissatisfaction with the manner of his victory, the examiner made it clear that he had already passed and that there was no way for someone who had already been approved to retake the exam. The only thing that mattered now was what kind of hunter he decided to be. Gon then asked who the candidate that had failed was, and the answer shocked him: Killua. To understand why Killua had been the only one to fail, it was necessary to revisit the events that unfolded after Gon's fight. After his friend lost consciousness, Killua questioned Hanzo on why he had submitted. With his abilities, he could have forced Gon to give up. Hanzo explained that when a person suffers, you can see hatred in their eyes. However, Gon never showed hatred, making the suffering pointless. In the following battle, Kurapika faced Hisoka. They fought until the magician whispered something to him, and Kurapika decided to submit, granting victory to Hisoka. Then Hanzo won his next fight. In the one that followed, the magician destroyed his rival until he surrendered. Killua, still wanting to fight, withdrew from his own match, allowing Pokol to advance. But then came the time for Killua to face Illumi Zoldyck, who had been entered in the exam under the alias Gitarakwur. When he removed his disguise and revealed his true face, Killua could barely believe he was standing before his older brother Illumi. He told him that their mother had cried tears of joy after Killua had stabbed her. She was proud, and she had sent Illumi to keep an eye on him. Illumi told his younger brother that he was not made to be a hunter because he was born to be an assassin. He stated that Killua would never find greater satisfaction than that of killing, because that was how they had raised him. However, Killua refused to accept this. There were other things he wanted to do, and one of them was to be friends with Gon. Illumi declared that this would be impossible. Even if he tried, he would soon feel the desire to kill Gon himself, and would do it. Leorio, outraged at hearing him say all of that to a child, shouted, "Killua, Gon already considers you his friend, so take this guy down the way only you can." But when his older brother heard this, he decided he would kill Gon. He did not want his brother to have friends. They would only distract him from becoming a great assassin. But first, of course, he needed the hunter's license to have immunity for the killings he would commit. He made it clear that if Killua wanted to save Gon, he would have to defeat him. But if he chose to fight, Illumi would annihilate him. Upon hearing this, Killua was so terrified that he simply submitted. His brother was pleased with the decision. He told him that in truth he was not going to kill Gon. He only wanted to show him that he was not made to have friends, since he had surrendered rather than try to save his friend. Leorio was the next to fight, but Killua, still deeply shaken, killed his own opponent and was disqualified. Upon hearing Illumi's confession, fury took hold of Gon. He marched up to Illumi with a strength that belied his size, grabbed him by the arm, and forced him to stand. With blazing eyes, he declared that if Illumi had forced Killua to kill, he would never forgive him. No violence would be committed there, but he made it clear that once he rescued Killua, he would ensure the two brothers never saw each other again. The tension in the room was palpable, but the fact was that each of them now held a license. The document granted them access to 90% of the world, preferential treatment at banks, and the option of selling it for a fortune that would make them millionaires, or simply keeping it to guarantee a comfortable life. After the ceremony, the young men sought out Satots to find out where Killua had gone. The examiner informed them that he had returned home, to Kukuro Mountain, where his family of assassins resided. Without hesitating, they decided to head there. Hisoka expressed surprise that Illumi had revealed the location of his home, but Illumi replied that it did not matter, since many already knew where it was. Illumi casually mentioned that in any case he planned to kill Gon, but Hisoka cut him off with an order. Gon was his prey, and he would be the only one to take care of him when the time came. Before the group departed, Examiner Satots called Gon aside for a private conversation. He revealed that his specialty was the discovery of ancient ruins, but admitted that in the beginning, what mattered most to him was the personal glory of his discoveries. Everything changed when he met a hunter who not only found ruins but spent his entire fortune restoring them. That man's dedication was many times more impressive than the ruin itself. His name was Gon Freecss, Gon's father, an enigmatic figure about whom it was impossible to find information. Satots confessed that his dream was one day to meet him and thank him for the inspiration. Before saying goodbye, he hesitated, wanting to say one more thing to Gon, but decided to stay silent and left. Later, in a conversation among the examiners, Satots mentioned that he had almost helped Gon by telling him that the hunter exams were not yet over, but managed to hold himself back in time. The journey brought the young men ever closer to the base of Killua's assassin family. The reputation of the Zoldycks was so legendary that the main gate of their estate had become a tourist attraction. The guide informed visitors that this gate was known as the door to Hades, as no one who had passed through it had ever returned alive. To prove the point, two burly men forced their way in, only for their skeletons to be ejected 2 seconds later. The group of tourists fled in terror, leaving only the young men behind. They approached the gatekeeper in search of information. Kindly, the old man explained that he could not let them through. The one responsible for the deaths was the family's guard dog, a monster named Mike, who only obeyed the Zoldycks. However, the young men realized that gate was a trap, a direct path into the beast's territory. The real entrance was not locked, but was known as the testing gate. If someone lacked the strength to open it, they were not considered worthy of entering the estate. Those who could manage it, however, did not need to worry about Mike. He would not attack anyone who entered by the proper way. The challenge, though, was immense. Each panel of the gate weighed twice as much as the one before it. Gon, who was not there for tests, decided he would enter through the beast's gate. The gatekeeper refused to hand over the keys. If they were friends of Killua's, he would not allow them to be devoured. Gon thanked him for his concern, but was determined to force his way through, until the old man, moved, decided to accompany them. His presence might prevent an attack from Mike, though the risk that all of them would be killed was still extremely high. In the end, however, they all wound up entering through the 2-ton gate. Mike watched them closely but did not attack. Despite having grown up in the countryside, surrounded by all manner of wild animals, Gon had never seen anything like it. The fear was real, but not enough to deter him from his mission of seeing Killua. They arrived at the butler's quarters, where one of them suggested they give up and go home. Gon's refusal was immediate, and so a training regimen began so they could open the next gates. They wore heavy vests. Every object in the house, from cups to furniture, weighed more than 20 kilograms. Meanwhile, somewhere in the mansion, Killua was being mistreated by his family. The next day, the young men tried to open the next gate, but their strength was still insufficient. The training continued. With one arm still injured, Gon counted on Kurapika and Leorio, who pushed themselves to their limits to help their friend reunite with Killua. They persisted, trying day after day, until all three became strong enough. However, the next staff members of the estate would not be so friendly. The moment Gon approached the next stage, a butler's apprentice struck him in the face repeatedly. She remembered how Killua, upon returning, had said as the very first thing that he had made a friend. The girl wished the best for him and did not want to hurt Gon, but she was under orders. Gon recognized the hesitation in her eyes and insisted, taking the blows until she could no longer continue. The instant she stopped, she was struck down by Kalua's mother, who appeared without warning. The matriarch informed Gon that Kalua could not see him at that moment. Later, Leorio examined the apprentice and confirmed that she was in fact unconscious. Inside, Killua continued to be mistreated at the hands of another of his brothers. However, the mention that his 3 friends would be killed was the trigger for him to break free from his chains, warning with icy fury that if his brother even attempted it, he would kill him first. The mother, reporting her son's state, suddenly began pleading with his father to stop. In a confinement chamber, Killua's grandfather freed him, informing him that his father wished to speak with him. The patriarch of the Zoldyck family asked Killua to tell him everything about the hunter exams. After hearing the account, he granted permission for the boy to join his friends, with a single condition, that he swear never to betray them. Killua did so without a moment's hesitation. When his mother arrived, the father calmed her, expressing his certainty that Killua would inevitably return as an assassin. Shortly after, in the butler's quarters, Killua and the young men were reunited, and finally the 4 of them were together again. When Gon woke up after his brutal fight with Hanzo, his first reaction was to refuse the hunter's license. He did not feel he deserved it given the manner in which the victory had been granted. The examiner, however, explained that refusing was impossible. All he could do was work until he felt worthy of it. And so Gon made a promise to himself. He would only truly accept the license when he landed a punch on Hisoka's face, just as Hisoka had done to him, and when he returned his plate to him. The problem was not knowing where to find him, but Kurapika had the answer. During their fight, Hisoka had whispered to him that he had information about the Phantom Troupe. In exchange, Kurapika should accept defeat. Swallowing his pride, he did so. After the licenses were handed out, Hisoka instructed him to go to Yorknew City in 6 months, as he would also be there. On that date, the world's most lavish auction would take place, an event that would draw the rarest and most expensive items and, consequently, the Phantom Troupe and Hisoka himself. With that information, they said their farewells, setting a reunion for September 1st in Yorknew City. Until then, Gon needed to become strong enough to punch Hisoka in the face. Time was short, and the required training was immense, but Killua knew exactly where they could train and earn money at the same time, a place called Heaven's Arena. The young men headed straight for Heaven's Arena, the 4th tallest building in the world. With the little money they had left, they bought entry tickets, knowing they would need to earn more there anyway. The mission was clear: to become stronger so that Gon could hit Hisoka while earning money to survive. The line to sign up at Heaven's Arena was enormous. The promise was that the higher you climbed in the building, the more money you would earn. There was no qualifying test, you simply signed up and the matches began. Killua noted that he already knew the place, as his father had left him there years ago, and after fighting non-stop for 2 years, he had reached the 200th floor. People as strong as Hisoka were up there, but on the higher floors. Gon's number was called. He stepped up to the ring to face his opponent. The battle had a 3-minute time limit. "Begin," announced the referee, but the fight ended in an instant. Thanks to the superhuman training to open the gates at Killua's home, Gon defeated his opponent with a single shove. As a result, he was sent directly to the 50th floor. Killua dispatched his opponent with equal ease and was promoted to the same level. Another boy, Zushi, was also sent to the same floor. On the way, it was explained that each victory meant going up 10 floors, and each defeat going down 10. Zushi approached them, a boy with nothing remarkable about him beyond great effort in the martial arts. For the first victory, the young men received the meager sum of 152 geni, but Killua explained that a win on the 50th floor earned up to 50,000 geni, and on the 100th, a million. Upon reaching the 150th, the prize was 10 million. Killua had already earned all of that, and could have claimed the prize from the 200th floor, but before doing so, he gave up and spent all his winnings on candy. At the time, he was only 6 years old. Upon reaching the 50th floor, fate, in a rather unfortunate twist, pitted Killua against Zushi. At this level, the atmosphere changed. An expectant crowd waited to see the two go at it. Killua intended to end the fight with a single blow. The tournament operated on a points system. Clean strikes earned 1 point, critical hits 2, and knockdowns 1 point. The first to reach 10 points won. A match could also be stopped if one of the opponents could not continue. Killua felt he had already won, but Zushi was still able to stay on his feet even after receiving another blow. He got back up quickly, preventing Killua from scoring points. Killua could not understand what was happening. That strike should have knocked out anyone. Zushi steadied himself and began to be enveloped by a strange aura. But his master, watching from the crowd, stopped him immediately, as if everyone's lives were in danger. Outside, Gon waited for Killua with his prize money. Killua recounted that he had won by technical knockout, but that in fighting that boy, he had felt something frightening, the same thing he had felt when he fought against his brother. Shortly after, they overheard Zushi's master Wing scolding him for almost using a technique called Ren. That was something he was supposed to save for the last floor. Curiosity was piqued, and they decided they would make it all the way to the end to discover what that technique was. The young men's ascent continued relentlessly, and they reached the 100th floor. Gon's tactic, based on pushing his opponents out of the ring, and Killua's, which consisted of one-hit knockouts, proved infallible. In no time, those boys were already millionaires. Amid their success, they learned that Zushi remained stuck on the 50th floor. The curiosity about the mysterious technique he had nearly used became unbearable, and they decided to seek him out for answers. Zushi, somewhat confused, mentioned names like Nen or Ren, but could not explain clearly. Impatient, Killua went directly to his master. He needed to know because he was certain that the overwhelming power of his brother had emanated from that same energy. Wing, the master, revealed that the technique was called Nen and that it could be used in 4 ways to forge a powerful warrior. However, his explanation was veiled and incomplete. He refused to reveal the whole truth, arguing that he could only teach it to his own students. In the wrong hands, that knowledge would become a weapon of mass destruction. As a demonstration of his power, he turned a simple sheet of paper into a deadly weapon. However, Killua's intuition was already alerting him to Wing's reluctance. The vague explanation didn't justify how Zushi had survived the devastating blow he had dealt him in the tournament. The journey took them to the 190th floor. The crowd waited with anticipation, wondering whether the prodigious boys could keep their streak of one-hit wins going. And so it was. The fighters at that level still did not pose a real challenge for either of them, and both reached the threshold of the 200th floor. From that point on, it was uncharted territory for both. As they made their way to reception, they were suddenly paralyzed by a malevolent aura, a crushing pressure that immobilized them until the receptionist appeared. She warned them about the new rules. There were 173 competitors on that floor, and the use of weapons was permitted. All participants were already millionaires. There, the fight was purely for glory. Suddenly, from the shadows behind her, Hisoka appeared. He knew he would find them there. With a sinister smile, he told them he would not allow them to register, as neither of them was ready for the 200th floor, and he paralyzed them again with his malevolent aura. It was then that Wing intervened. He confessed that he had not told them the truth about Nen, but promised that if they accompanied him, he would reveal everything, enabling them to break through Hisoka's barrier. The receptionist issued an ultimatum. If they did not register before midnight, Gon would be forced to start from scratch. And since this was the second time Killua had reached that level without registering, he would be permanently banned. With the clock working against them, Wing needed to teach them the true art of Nen. He explained that Nen uses the body's life energy and manifests through 4 fundamental principles: Ten, Zetsu, Ren, and Hatsu. Ten consists of using one's life energy as a barrier to cover and protect the body. Zetsu erases the presence of the aura, rendering the user undetectable. Ren, the technique Hisoka had used, expands and amplifies the life energy on the battlefield. And lastly, Hatsu, which they did not go into in depth, is the ability to give a unique form to one's own aura. The only way to overcome a Nen master like Hisoka was to become a master oneself. For now, the young men would only need to learn Ten to protect themselves from Hisoka's Ren. However, they only had a few hours until midnight. Wing explained that there were 2 ways to awaken Nen: slowly, through meditation, or by force. It had taken Zushi 6 months, but they did not have that kind of time. In a drastic measure, Wing forced an abrupt awakening upon them, impacting their auras with his own to forcibly activate them. He did this only to prevent Gon and Killua from being killed. On the 200th floor, everyone had mastered Nen. Without it, they would be easy prey. There was no time to waste. Wing opened all the aura nodes in both of their bodies. At that moment, their auras were invisible and dispersed. They needed to compress them into their bodies to form the barrier of Ten. Focusing on a neutral stance, the innate talent of both manifested. They mastered Ten rapidly, and Wing tested their defense. The trial by fire followed. The young men managed to push through Hisoka's Ren. The magician welcomed them to the 200th floor. He knew Gon was there to train, with the ultimate goal of facing him. He acknowledged his effort, but also the long road still ahead of him. Even so, he issued a challenge. If they won even a single fight on that floor, he would accept the confrontation. Finally, they reached reception, where the final rules were explained. To advance, 10 victories would be needed. If they accumulated 4 defeats before that, they would be eliminated. They would have up to 90 days to prepare before each fight. If the deadline passed without a fight taking place, they would be disqualified. Those who secured 10 victories would earn the right to challenge the 20 strongest warriors of Heaven's Arena, each of them the master of their own private floor. Defeating one of them meant becoming the new master of that floor. And for those who reached master level, the doors of the Battle Olympia would open, where the grand winner would gain the right to a life of luxury on the building's top floor. But none of that mattered to the young men. Their attention was focused solely on Hisoka and on the need to become stronger. Ignoring everything else, they headed to their room to prepare for the next fight. Finally, the day of battle arrived. Gon's opponent was Guido, an experienced fighter who up to that point had suffered only one defeat. For Gon, the situation was discouraging. His knowledge was limited to covering himself with his aura, with no idea whatsoever of how to mount an attack. The difficulty of the fight was evident from the start. Guido launched his tops, the same weapons with which he had forced so many opponents into submission. Using Nen to control them with deadly precision, he struck Gon, scoring the first point. Shortly after, other tops hit him in an unpredictable sequence that left him unable to react. Guido already had 4 points. Gon found himself at an impasse, unable to maintain his protective barrier and at the same time track the chaotic trajectory of the tops. It was then that he noticed a pattern. When he was not standing on the ring, the tops stopped moving. He observed that the referee himself stayed off the platform to avoid being hit. The conclusion was clear: the tops only moved across the board. They did not actively pursue their target. With this new perception, he attempted an aerial attack, jumping to catch Guido off guard, but his opponent revealed he had one more defensive technique, and Gon crashed awkwardly to the floor. The impact earned Guido another 3 points. In an act of desperation, Gon decided to risk everything. He would drop his Nen barrier for a moment, to focus entirely on completely concealing his presence. It was a dangerous gamble. The blow from a single top could kill him. Aware of this, Guido attacked with full force, but Gon's plan worked and he managed to dodge. However, the bold maneuver was not enough to prevent his inevitable defeat. After the fight, Gon's body was in a terrible state with more than 12 fractures. Killua was furious at him for having risked his life so recklessly, but Wing's anger as his master was even greater. He felt directly responsible for what had occurred. Gon could have died, and the blame would have fallen on the shoulders of the one who had taught him those techniques with unwavering authority. He forbade him from fighting and from using Nen until he had made a full recovery. If he disobeyed, his training would be terminated. Gon accepted the condition, sealing the promise with a thread of Nen. Outside, Wing questioned Killua about his objectives. Killua confessed that the main focus was to defeat Hisoka, but also admitted that Gon became emotional and reckless in combat, not caring about anything else. Regret began to take hold of Wing for having taught them all of this. What he did not know was that perhaps he had already placed Nen in the wrong hands. Although Gon had a noble soul, Killua was another matter entirely. In a calculating tone, Killua said there would be no problem if he no longer wished to train them. After all, Hisoka or his brother also knew how to use Nen. Wing felt the veiled blackmail in his words and, resigned, stated that he would continue to be their master. When Killua returned to the room, he found Gon already enveloping his body with his life energy, as Ten also had the ability to accelerate the healing process. In another part of the world, Kurapika was looking for an agency to obtain information from the underworld. They quickly noticed that he had no control over his life energy and asked him to return. When he did, he didn't even understand what they were referring to. Later, in a forest, he was intercepted by a seasoned fighter. The man was so fast that he snatched Kurapika's hunter's license without him even noticing. He explained that without knowledge of Nen, Kurapika would have no chance of defeating him, and gave a brief demonstration of his power. After the confrontation, Kurapika set his pride aside and with humility asked the man to train him. He accepted, becoming his master. A month later, thanks to the constant use of Ten, Gon recovered in record time. The healing came at the right moment, as Killua had managed to get tickets to Hisoka's next fight. The magician was a celebrity there. His record stood at 8 wins and 3 losses, and the only losses occurred because he had been unable to show up. When he fights, he never loses. His opponent would be one of his old rivals, who in the past had already managed to send Hisoka to the ground, though nothing beyond that. However, Wing held them back, arguing that watching the fight was the same as training, and Gon still needed another month of rest. So only Killua went to the arena. On the way, he came across Hisoka's opponent. The man's confidence caught his attention, and he decided to approach him. Killua hid his presence, but was detected within a second. Passing himself off as a fan, he was seen through immediately, as the fighter, Castro, studied all of his rivals on that floor. With a smile, Castro said it was a pleasure to meet him and gave him a piece of advice on how to better conceal his presence. Only one though, as Killua's aura told him they might soon be rivals. Face to face with Hisoka in the ring, Castro guaranteed that in none of their previous encounters had he fought with his full power, but that this time it would be different. The fight began and Hisoka took a hit, a feat Castro repeated shortly after. He backed away only to send Hisoka to the floor again. Castro already had a 4-point lead. Hisoka remained calm, simply watching, until Castro prepared his technique to sever one of his arms. Hisoka simply held his position and lost the limb, but assured that everything was part of his plan. He backed away, held the severed arm, and finally announced that he had deciphered the technique. Castro was using a double created with Nen. The technique required an immense effort, but above all, concentration. All that time, he had let his clone fight while he watched safely from a distance. Now he decided to cut off Hisoka's other arm, but the magician transformed his own arm into playing cards to perform a trick. He asked Castro to think of a card, and to his astonishment, pulled that exact card from inside his arm. Frustrated, Castro tore off the other limb. However, Hisoka reconstructed his right arm with none. He told him that he now knew how to anticipate the use of his double, and that it was a shame. In the past, he had only let him live because he thought he would become a worthy opponent, but now that he knew his technique, things would end. With terrifying speed, he dodged the clone's attack and stopped the real Castro in his tracks. Swiftly, he drove playing cards all over his body, preventing him from calming his mind enough to use Nen, and Castro fell, defeated. Hisoka made his way to a private location to have his arms sewn back on, meeting with an old companion. With impressive mastery, she used a thread imbued with her own life energy to reconnect every nerve, vein, bone, and muscle, first the left, then the right. To finish the process, Hisoka employed a technique of his own creation called texture surprise, with which he concealed the scars until they became invisible. Even with the accelerated recovery, he needed rest. However, before leaving, his companion informed him that, as a member of the Phantom Troupe, he was expected to present himself in Yorknew City at noon on August 30th. Absence would be punished with elimination by the boss. What she did not know was that Hisoka's affiliation with the troupe was a sham. His true objective was to have them in his sights. The 2 months of rest came to an end, and Nen training resumed. Wing instructed Gon to activate his Ten. With concentration, he succeeded, and the lesson could begin. They watched the recording of Hisoka's last fight on television. Wing asked the young men whether they could see threads of aura coming from the magician's hands, but they could not see anything. The reason, the master explained, was that this was the next level of Nen. The technique needed to be invisible to the opponent. To achieve that level of perception, they would need to strengthen their Ren. Meanwhile, Zushi, without realizing it, was already able to glimpse the technique. Following his master's instructions, he concentrated and managed to see Hisoka's aura. Now, the challenge for Gon and Killua was to reach that same level of perception before their next fight. On the way to training, they were intercepted by 3 competitors: Guido, the top spinning fighter, and 2 others. The trio wanted to fight the young men, believing they had found an easy victory. Killua initially ignored them, but they made it clear they would do whatever it took to force the confrontation, and the challenge was accepted. After training, Zushi was heading to his room when he was captured by the 3. Fortunately, Killua had already anticipated a move like that. He agreed to fight each of them in exchange for Zushi's release, with the only condition that they not touch Gon. They accepted, but the promise was hollow. They left Zushi's shoe at Gon's door, which, thinking his friend was in danger, also also agreed to fight the three. However, Killua discovered the ruse and was furious at the broken word. The next day, both Gon and Killua had managed to strengthen their nen to the point of finally seeing the technique Hisoka had used. They noticed that his aura possessed a sticky, elastic quality. Wing approved, revealing that what they had just done was called Gyo, the technique for seeing the opponent's aura. With this new ability, it was time to go back to fighting and then continue training. But before the day of the fight, Killua paid a visit to one of the kidnappers to punish him for breaking his word. As a result, on the day of the match, the opponent did not show up and Killua won by default. The man had fled the city, but not before warning his companions to be very careful with those boys. They should not be underestimated. The warning, however, came too late. Killua appeared in their room merely to show them he could kill them whenever he wanted, and then left. On the day of Gon's fight, he also won, as his opponent never returned either. Now he needed to face Guido again, and this time he would do so with his fishing rod. The fight started directly. Guido began spinning to avoid being touched and launched tops in every direction. This time, however, Gon blocked them with his nen. He and Killua had improved exponentially. They were no longer the same as 2 months ago. Guido thought Gon's aim was to hook him with the rod, but in reality, Gon targeted one of the floor tiles, lifting it and causing Guido to trip. Quickly, he seized the opening and broke all the tops. Gon won, but not before warning him. If Guido played dirty, they would too, and if he ever touched Zushi again, they would break his face. Killua's turn came. He employed his sharpened assassin techniques. His rival backed away, projecting his aura and drawing his whips to defend himself, waiting for the right moment to attack. Killua grabbed the whips, but they contained a trap, discharging millions of volts into his body. What his opponent did not know was that Killua had been accustomed to being tortured by his family since childhood. He withstood the electric shock without flinching, launched the opponent into the air, and received him with his own electric discharge. For the next fight, Killua was set to face Guido, but Guido had been unable to recover after his confrontation with Gon, so Killua won automatically. Gon, however, still needed to face Real Felt. The moment the fight began, Gon threw a tile at him, predicting his escape route. He blocked his wheelchair and finished him off, claiming yet another victory. The boy's progress was something Hisoka watched with particular interest. He approached and declared that the time had come. He would accept a fight with Gon whenever the boy wished, for he was now ready. However, before the final battle, Wing imposed one last lesson: mastery of Hatsu. This was the fundamental technique for being able to control one's own aura. To do so, it was crucial that they discover which category of Nen their auras belonged to. The method for this revelation was water divination. Depending on the liquid's reaction to their Nen, they would have the answer. Gon was the first to undergo the test. The water's reaction left no room for doubt. His aura type was Enhancer. Zushi's, in turn, was revealed to be Manipulator, and Killua's, Transmuter. With their Nen types now known, the task for the next 4 weeks was clear. Train until the water showed an even greater reaction to their auras. Time passed, and Gon, feeling prepared, placed the call to Hisoka. The date was set. The fight would take place on July 10th. Hisoka, on the other end, waited with palpable anticipation. In their master's final test, the young men demonstrated their progress in undeniable fashion. The water reacted dramatically, in accordance with the aura classes each one possessed. With that, Wing declared that they had not only passed the test, but the hunter exam as well. The boys' confusion was evident. He then revealed to them that for such a dangerous profession, the true final test was learning to use Nen. This power, highly destructive if misused, was intentionally omitted from the official exams. The hunters who passed the written exam needed to discover Nen on their own. Hanzo and Kurapika were already learning it from other masters. Pokole continued practicing. Leorio, well, was focused on his medical school exams. Hisoka and Illumi, who had already mastered the technique, were not part of the equation. From that moment on, the lessons with Master Wing were officially over. The anticipation for the showdown between Gon and Hisoka was palpable. Tickets sold out in record time. Both fighters stepped up to the combat platform. A victory for Hisoka would mean the right to directly challenge a floor master. With their bodies enveloped in aura barriers, Gon took the initiative, delivering the first move. Hisoka, with fluid grace, dodged his strikes and connected the first blow. Gon recovered quickly, but his attacks couldn't find their mark, and he took another hit from Hisoka. Even so, he could keep going, at least for now. Dodging a punch, he landed a clean hit on him, which, ironically, gave Hisoka a point. The magician's only apparent weakness might be his overconfidence, and Gon needed to wait for the best moment to exploit it. In a clever move, he lifted a tile from the floor and shattered it into 1,000 pieces, creating a curtain of debris that blocked Hisoka's vision. Amid the distraction, he succeeded, a clean punch to the magician's face. It was a tremendous advance, but things were only just beginning. With the feat, Gon scored 2 points. Both moved toward the center of the platform, and as he had promised, Gon returned the plate to him. After the gesture, they each backed away. Hisoka recognized that Gon's aura was that of an enhancer. Analyzing his aura and personality, he confessed that he himself was a transmuter, explaining that an individual's personality is dictated by the type of aura they possess. Be that as it may, the battle resumed with ferocity. Gon kept pulling away from each of his attacks, trying to maintain distance, but Hisoka's presence was overwhelming, and he went after him, managing to land another hit. Gon was beginning to feel the weight of the injuries against the overwhelming power of his opponent, who with his precise strikes was opening up a lead on the scoreboard. He tried to think of another way to handle the situation, knowing that if things continued at this rate, Hisoka would win. Hisoka knew it too. He had no intention of stopping and lured him in with his aura to receive him with a powerful blow to the head. With his bungee gum technique, there was no escape. But before continuing, Hisoka posed a question. If he answered correctly, Hisoka would allow him to hit him. The question was, at what moment had he applied his bungee gum to his cheek? Gon, who had not noticed the moment of application, gave the wrong answer. Had he used the Gyo technique, he would have been able to see his aura, but thinking about it, it would have done him no good either, since Hisoka could have connected it with each blow he had struck him. Gon launched a direct attack. The boy's determination, for some reason, excited Hisoka, and he grew even more enthused at the feel of Gon's fists, until another blow sent him back. However, as much as Gon had fallen and gotten back on his feet, the referee made the controversial decision to award Hisoka 9 points and Gon 4. The crowd expressed its displeasure with boos. Hisoka needed only one more hit to win, and he delivered it, directing a rock toward him and officially winning the battle. He told Gon that he had improved greatly and that he expected more from him in their next fight, but the next one would be in the real world, with their lives on the line. Gon knew he was far from Hisoka's level, but also knew that one day he might reach it. Wing congratulated Gon and acknowledged that the fight had taught him a great deal. He told both of them that they now needed to find their own style of nen. The young men said their farewells. Now that Gon had fulfilled his promise of hitting Hisoka and returning his plate, they would head back to Whale Island to show his license to his Aunt Mito, while Killua decided to accompany him. The young men's return to Whale Island was marked by a warm embrace from Aunt Mito, who received them with open arms. Killua's presence came as no surprise. Throughout the exams, Gon had maintained a constant correspondence, sending letters that recounted every event and described every person he crossed paths with. During dinner, Killua observed with curiosity the ritual of closing one's eyes for a moment before eating, a custom strange to him. The culminating moment of the evening came when Gon, with restrained pride, showed his hunter's license to his aunt. Her reaction was not one of jubilation, but rather of quiet resignation. She knew she could no longer stop him. Gon led Killua through the forest that had been his home, showing him the corners of his childhood. At night, under a blanket of stars, Gon revealed his plan to look for information about his father. When they reached Yorknew City, Killua, in a moment of vulnerability, confessed his admiration. Gon had a clear objective, a guiding star, while he felt adrift, with nothing and wanting nothing. It was there that the mutual confession sealed what both already knew. Each was the other's first true friend. The company and the joy they found together were a balm, and Killua decided he would join the search for Gon's father, hoping that along the way he would discover something he himself wanted to do. Suddenly, a question arose. What about Gon's mother? Everyone knew about the father, but the maternal figure was a silence. Gon explained that when he was little, his aunt, fearing that knowledge of his living father would lead him to become a hunter, had invented the story that both had died in an accident. Years later, upon discovering the truth about Ging, he simply deduced that his mother was the one who had actually died. Aunt Mito had always been his mother figure, and he felt no need to look for another. Back home, an object was placed on the table. Aunt Mito revealed that Gon's father had asked her to deliver it to him when he became a hunter, and that she was ready to tell him everything she knew. His name was Ging, Mito's cousin. At the age of 12, he left the island to take the exam, saying goodbye with an enigmatic phrase, "There's something I want," without ever revealing what. He never returned. Shortly after his departure, Ging also disappeared. However, 10 years later, he reappeared on the island, carrying in his arms a small Gon. He said he had separated from the boy's mother and asked them to look after him for a while, and then he left again, leaving behind only a small box. Gon and Killua tried to open it in every possible way without success. The condition Ging had imposed was the key. His son should only receive it after becoming a hunter. The reason was simple. The box would only open with the use of Nen. And so it was. Inside was another box, this one opened with the hunter's license. Within it rested a ring, a cassette tape, and a memory card. The young men inserted the tape into the tape player. The voice that sounded was Gon's father, with a direct question. "Gon, do you want to see me? If so, keep listening. If not, turn off the tape." The voice continued, laden with brutal honesty. "Hunters are selfish. If you're still here and want to see me, I have to tell you the truth. I don't want to see you. I don't have the courage for it. After all, I decided not to be your father just so I could do what I wanted. I'm not a good person. I don't know when you'll listen to this tape, but there is something that won't change. I will always be the way I am. Probably while you're listening to this, I'll be off doing something crazy. If you want to see me, find me, but I don't want to see you. If I see you coming, I'll run. Good luck. You're a hunter, so you'll be able to catch me. I have something about your mother. If you want to know about her, keep listening." But Gon stopped the recording. He already had a mother, and that was his aunt. Suddenly, an aura emanated from the tape player. The tape was programmed to erase itself after being heard. Killua, in his silence, recognized the bluntness of his friend's father. 2 clues still remained. To read the memory card, they needed a video game console from 3 generations ago. Killua managed to find one and inserted the card. Inside, they found save data from a game that had never been officially released. Greed Island. The clue was right there, and they needed to get their hands on the game. The task, however, was monumental. The game was not sold commercially, and online rumors said it was worth billions. With the money they had earned at Heaven's Arena, they posted a buying ad. Both had 800 million Jenny, but they still needed another 5 billion or more, depending on the price any reseller might set. Many responses came in, most from scammers. The young men didn't know enough about the game to tell the real from the fake. They needed more information. To that end, Killua contacted one of his butlers, asking him to put him in touch with his brother Meluki. A video game expert, Meluki knew about Greed Island. He coveted it himself, but had never managed to obtain it. However, in his search, he had gathered a few leads. In exchange for a copy of Gon's father's memory, he shared them with his brother. The first was a website exclusive to hunters, which required access from a public computer. The second option was to go to the Yorknew City auction, the same destination as Kurapika. There was a rumor that copies of the game would be auctioned there. With a new direction set, the young men left the island once more. Gon swore that, after finding his father, he would return, and both set off, heading straight for Yorknew City. While some paths crossed, Kurapika's was a solitary one, guided by a single, burning purpose. His search brought him to the doors of an agency specializing in providing security and bodyguards for the wealthy elite. However, the receptionist dismissed him with an enigmatic condition. He did not yet qualify for any position, but could return when he was able to see his aura. Frustrated, Kurapika left, only to find, outside, a man who offered to show him the art of Nen. Understanding that this was the training he lacked, he accepted without hesitation. Under his new master's tutelage, it was discovered that he was a conjurer. What followed were 6 months of hard, relentless training. At the end of that period, Kurapika returned to the agency. This time, he was accepted. When asked about the type of client he was looking for, Hisoka's words echoed in his mind. The Phantom Troupe would be at the auction in Yorknew City, so he requested a client whose mission had a connection to the grand event. Fate presented him with a dark proposition. A collector of human body parts was seeking security. Kurapika accepted, as it was what he needed to do, but a deep revulsion gnawed at him from within at the thought of having to protect someone like that, especially after what had happened to his clan. The job would take him to the Nostrade mansion, Just like him, other hunters presented themselves for the remaining bodyguard positions. A test was held to select only the best. It was there that Kurapika demonstrated the fruit of his training, conjuring ethereal chains connected to his fingers through Nen. Each chain had a particular and lethal function. The thumbs, the holy chain, healed wounds rapidly. The middle fingers, the chain jail, could imprison his opponents and prevent them from using Nen, a formidable power he could only use against the Phantom Troupe, the result of a self-imposed Nen vow and contract to amplify his strength. The ring fingers, the dowsing chain, served as an infallible lie detector and tracker, and the pinkies, the judgment chain, could force his adversaries to make a vow, the breaking of which would result in instant death. After the test, only the cream of the guards remained, and their mission was handed to them: escort Neon, daughter of Light Nostrade, one of the senior members of the Mafia, to a hotel in Yorknew City. While Kurapika infiltrated the upper echelons of organized crime, the young men arrived in that same metropolis. At an internet cafe, they accessed the link provided by Maluki, Killua's brother. The instant they did, an aura enveloped them, transporting their consciousness to a virtual bar where the person in charge gave them crucial and chilling information. Only Nen users could play Greed Island. Once inside, no one could leave, even if the console was switched off. And dying in the game meant dying in real life. The confirmation came: the game was no longer in circulation, but 7 copies still existed, and one of them would be auctioned in Yorknew City. The aura dissipated, leaving them with more information and a monumental problem: finding a way to get the money needed to participate in the auction. Later, on the busy streets of the city, fate reunited them with Leorio. Just as they had promised months before, they met there. The conversation flowed, catching up on everything they had been through, and Leorio, without hesitation, joined the mission to help his friends obtain a copy of the game. At the same time, Kurapika and his companions arrived in Yorknew City with Neon. It was then that the young woman's power and her importance to her father were revealed. With only a person's full name, she could predict the future, writing a poem in a trance that detailed what would happen the following week, a prophecy that never failed. Her father used her as a tool to climb the mafia hierarchy, dreaming one day of becoming the boss, and for that reason surrounded her with impenetrable security. From the shadows, the Phantom Troupe began to make its move. The plan was audacious: to appear at the auction. Their leader, Trollo Lucilfer, gave the direct order: steal all the items that would be auctioned. If anyone tried to stop them, permission to kill was granted. Before long, the rumors reached the ears of Light Nostrade's bodyguards. The auction would take place in the same hotel where they were staying, which meant that on the day of the event, everyone would be in charge of protecting Neon until it was all over. The need for funds for the auction led Gon to a creative solution on the city streets. He challenged people to arm wrestling matches. Seeing only a child, many accepted, only to be paralyzed by Gon's superhuman strength, amplified by his Nen. The betting money began to accumulate. However, chance placed in his path a member of the Phantom Troupe. It was Shizuku Murasaki, also a Nen user, and the confrontation would be anything but easy, and it wasn't. The duel stretched on, a battle of wills and auras that demanded an immense effort from Gon to win. Shizuku, who was merely passing through, accepted the defeat and continued on her way, reuniting shortly after with the rest of the troupe to plan the imminent heist. The day had arrived. Strategically positioned in the building opposite the hotel, Kurapika kept watch at the entrance alongside Melody, a young woman whose powers of observation were extraordinarily sharp. It was she who noticed the unmistakable traits that marked Kurapika as a survivor of the Kurta clan. With a rare sensitivity, she promised to keep his secret, and to seal the trust between them, she shared a confidence of her own. Melody revealed that she had only accepted that job because her personal mission had brought her there. She needed to find the Sonata of Darkness. Legend had it that the melody had been composed by the devil himself, and she had had the misfortune of hearing its opening chords. The experience had transformed her appearance in a terrible way. There was a rumor that the score would be auctioned, and her only wish was to destroy it, as she believed only then could she recover her former form. The auction had barely begun when the party erupted with overwhelming violence. The Phantom Troupe stormed the stage and opened fire indiscriminately, sowing chaos and death. That night, many millionaires met their end, including the other 2 bodyguards accompanying Kurapika and Melody. With chilling efficiency, Shizuku used her ability, Blinky, to vacuum up all traces, cleaning the crime scene as if nothing had happened. The noise of the slaughter, however, attracted the attention of several organizations. Kurapika realized something very serious was happening and, together with Melody, made his way to the location. When they arrived, however, the Phantom Troupe had already stolen all the auction items and was escaping in a helium balloon. A call to their leader, however, revealed a bewildering twist. Someone else had gotten there first and stolen the items. When they arrived, the vault was already empty. Chrollo, the leader, deduced that the deed could only have been carried out by one of the Tendons, the supreme bosses of the global underworld market, figures of immense wealth and influence who controlled illegal operations like the Yorknew auction. With that deduction, Chrollo ordered the hunt for the Dons. But his departure was abruptly interrupted by an attack from several mafia families, furious at having lost their leaders in the auction raid. With the force of 2 Nen-powered attacks, Uvogin landed in the middle of the mafiosos and annihilated them in an instant. At a distance, Kurapika followed the trail of destruction. It was then that he saw 3 specialist hunters moving swiftly in Uvogin's direction. They were mercenaries in the pay of the Tendons, among the best in their field. The confrontation that followed was intense. The hunter's excellence was evident, but little by little, the troop member imposed his brute force, taking control of the combat and finishing off all 3. After the victory, Uvogin let his guard down for one fatal instant. In the blink of an eye, he was imprisoned by Kurapika's chains, which appeared out of nowhere. No one had time to react or even see his attacker. The chains, strengthened by the Nen vow Kurapika had made, were unbreakable. He was taken to an abandoned building to be interrogated. Uvogin, however, maintained that the Troupe had had nothing to do with the theft of the auction items. Someone had gotten there ahead of them. When Kurapika asked about the fate of his clansmen, Uvogin confirmed with cruel contempt that he had killed them. Fed up with the Troupe's brutality, Kurapika's fury erupted, and he unleashed a barrage of punches on his prisoner's face. Meanwhile, the Phantom Troupe gathered with Chrollo and reported the events. Among them was Hisoka, who, upon hearing the description of the attacker, deduced it could only be Kurapika. Discreetly stepping away from the group, he sent him a message. After all, they had arranged to meet in Yorknew a long time ago. In the conversation that followed, Hisoka revealed everything he had learned about the Phantom Troupe and proposed an alliance to bring them down, a proposal Kurapika accepted. However, while they spoke, the troupe managed to locate Uvogin through the Nen ability of one of their members. The rescue was swift, but Uvogin was consumed by an incandescent rage. He would not rest until he killed the chain-wielding boy for humiliating him in that manner. When Kurapika reunited with his companions, he was informed of the escape and the imminent danger he was in. His life had only hours left. With the help of one of his own, Uvogin didn't take long to find him. The battle was inevitable. Both agreed to fight in a deserted location, an arid desert where only one would walk away alive. Uvogin demanded to know his identity. With a voice heavy with hatred, Kurapika revealed that he belonged to the Kurta clan and that his mission was to exterminate every member of the Phantom Troupe for the massacre they had carried out. With introductions made, the battle began. Uvogin unleashed his tremendous force, destroying the landscape around him, while Kurapika kept his distance, attacking with his heavy chains. Despite his agility, Uvogin managed to dodge all the attacks and, seeing an opportunity, struck Kurapika with a devastating blow. The young man withstood the impact, but shortly after, Uvogin broke his arm with a blunt punch. However, it had all been a trap. Kurapika had hidden his chains with Zetsu, and now had his enemy exactly where he wanted him. Uvogin couldn't understand how he could be so strong. It was then that Kurapika showed him his eyes in action. When the Scarlet Eyes awakened, he gained the ability to use all branches of Nen at 100% of their capacity. Enraged, Kurapika began striking him with all his strength. Once he had subdued him, he began with the questions, but Uvogin refused to answer, sealing his fate. Kurapika eliminated him without hesitation. Afterwards, he buried his body in the sand and walked away. Meanwhile, the rest of the troupe waited for Uvogin with Chrollo. The delay led the leader to deduce that something had gone wrong, and he ordered them to search for him. Elsewhere in the city, the young men continued their search for ways to earn money to buy Greed Island. Their path crossed with that of a treasure hunter, who told them he might be able to help them get a copy of the game. They decided to work together, but their plans were interrupted by a call from Leorio. The news was important. He had just spotted two members of the Phantom Troupe wandering the area. In the relentless search for ways to fund their adventure, fate led the young men to a bounty hunter's post. There, they discovered that someone was offering an exorbitant sum for the elimination of the Phantom Troupe. It was at that moment that for the first time, they saw the faces of the infamous group's members printed on posters. Although the temptation was great, they decided for the time being to explore other avenues for money. The opportunity, however, seemed to pursue them. Before them materialized Finks Magcube and Nobunaga Hazama, two troupe members who were actively searching for Kurapika. Simultaneously, at the troupe's base, Trollo, their leader, discovered that the blonde chain user worked as a bodyguard for Neon and, with cold cunning, decided to kidnap her to lure him into a trap. Security around Neon went to maximum alert. In an emergency meeting, her father informed the bodyguards that the 10 Dons, furious, had now set their sights on the total annihilation of the Phantom Troupe. To that end, they had enlisted the services of two members of the legendary Zoldyck family, Killua's grandfather and his father. Meanwhile, the young men, using an advanced application of Ren that allowed them to sense aura across a wide area, were drawing ever closer to the two troupe members. Their presence, however, was discovered. More members emerged from the shadows and quickly captured them. They were interrogated about Kurapika's whereabouts. They denied knowing him, but their lack of conviction betrayed them, and they were taken to the troupe's base. There, they reunited with Shizuku, the woman Gon had tested his strength against on the street. It was then that Pakunoda entered the picture. Her power, the memory bomb, allowed her to read people's memories. However, upon examining the young men's minds, she found nothing relevant. Her power seemed to have failed, but in truth it had not. The only information the troupe had was that their enemy fought with chains, and since the young men had never seen Kurapika use that technique, there was no memory to be read. After the interrogation, they were locked up, but despite constant surveillance, it didn't take long for them to escape, breaking through the walls of their room. Now aware of the danger their friend was in, they set off to find him and help him. Meanwhile, upon returning to his post, Kurapika was informed that Neon had been kidnapped. Without hesitating, he activated one of his chains to begin tracking. Trollo, disguised as a bodyguard, had won Neon's trust and was dining with her. He asked her to give a demonstration of her power, and she agreed. It was through her prophecy that Trollo confirmed the death of his friend Uvogen. The news was significant to him. He even shed a few tears. Afterwards, he asked her to reveal his own destiny as well. Immediately after, he left her unconscious and set off to orchestrate an assault on Yorknew, together with the rest of the Troupe, in honor of his companion's death. With sinister music as a backdrop, the group plunged the city into chaos. The explosions and gunfire soaked the streets with the blood of innocents. Inside the building, Kurapika found Neon. Determined to eliminate any possibility of a troupe member being infiltrated, he began patrolling the corridors until he received a call from Gon, who told him everything he had discovered during his captivity. After the massacre they had orchestrated, Trollo was found by the Zoldyck family. Silva and Xeno Zoldyck cornered him on the highest floor of the building. Trollo, whose power, the skill hunter, allowed him to steal Nen techniques from his opponents, had already stolen Neon's ability. But before continuing with his plans, he needed to survive the combined might of the two legendary assassins. However, he had an ace up his sleeve. The battle that followed was of brutal intensity. The Zoldicks acknowledged his strength. Xeno then decided to make a risky move, asking his son to kill them both if necessary. He tried to corner Trollo with a sequence of blows, while Silva, at his side, accumulated two massive spheres of power. When Xeno immobilized him, Silva struck both of them with the two great balls of power, creating a gigantic explosion that demonstrated why his family's reputation was more than justified. However, while all this was happening, the Troupe was carrying out Krollo's order and killing the Tendons. Upon witnessing the scene, Illumi called his father to inform him of what had happened. The news caused Silva and Xeno to halt their attack. They could eliminate Krollo, but a fundamental rule of the Zoldyck family dictated that if the person who hired them died before the mission's completion, the mission was cancelled. With that said, they simply left, and Krollo survived. Shortly after, he reunited with his team and, capitalizing on the mission's success, spread the rumor that they were all dead. The news spread like wildfire and quickly reached Kurapika's ears. Incredulous, he went to see the corpses and confirmed, with a knot in his stomach that they were indeed dead. He felt strange, but tried to carry on with his life. What Kurapika didn't know was that the Phantom Troupe was very much alive. The corpses were perfect replicas composed using the power of Kortopi and Machi. Afterward, they simply went to the auction, which had been reopened after the items had been recovered. There, Kurapika infiltrated it and acquired the Scarlet Eyes, which, as much as it pained him, he handed over to Light and Neon to cement their trust and continue his infiltration. Immediately after, he went to look for the young men. As the dust settled, the Phantom Troupe opted for a strategic retreat, keeping a low profile for the time being. Kario, using the prediction abilities he had recently stolen from Neon, began to chart the troupe's own future. He wrote the destiny of each member, discovering with chilling clarity that 5 of them would meet their death at Kurapika's hands. Hisoka, seizing the first opportunity, stepped away to contact his ally, informing him that the troupe was still alive. His own betrayal had nearly been exposed by Kario's prophecy, but with masterful deception, he altered the writing with his bungee gum. Not only did he get away with it, but he also convinced the troupe to remain in the city for one more day, granting Kurapika the time he needed to come and eliminate them all. Nobunaga, however, began to suspect his intentions, but Kario intervened, deciding to place his trust in Hisoka's apparent loyalty. When the young men reunited with Kurapika, they shared everything that had happened. For now, he could not risk a direct attack on the troupe's base. His role as a bodyguard was not yet finished. The conversation drifted to Nen vows, and Gon, curious, asked how one was made. Kurapika showed him, not without first warning him of the fatal consequences of breaking a vow. After the brief lesson, they parted ways. Determined to help their friend, the young men decided to infiltrate the troupe's base. Kahlua, in a plan that would only make sense to him, disguised himself as a woman to be more incisive and go unnoticed. Suddenly, they saw the troupe moving en masse. It turned out that, just like their supposed corpses, the Scarlet Eyes Kurapika had recovered were in fact creations of Kortopi's Nen, who could now track their location. The troupe was heading rapidly for the hotel. The young men, realizing their friend was about to be cornered, made a drastic decision. They turned themselves in to create a distraction, and it worked. Upon seeing them, Trollo was distracted and ordered they be taken back to the base. Meanwhile, however, other troupe members continued pursuing the Eyes. They found them being transported by Squala, another of Light Nostrade's bodyguards. It seemed they had been deceived, but Pakunoda seized the opportunity to read Squala's memories, and finally the image of Kurapika was imprinted in her mind. She transmitted this mental image to her companions in the form of a Nen bullet, and they all returned swiftly to the hotel to plan the capture. As soon as they arrived, Trollo wanted to verify once and for all whether the young men knew Kurapika. He asked Pakunoda to read their memories. She did so, but before she could utter a single word, the lights went out. When they came back on, there was a letter for her. The message was clear and threatening. If she revealed what she had seen, he would kill Trollo. After that, she swore to keep her silence. Kurapika, who had orchestrated the blackout, couldn't hold back his desire to hurt them, but he needed Trollo as a hostage to guarantee the release of his friends. He communicated with the troupe, imposing the condition that the hostage exchange be carried out with only Pakunoda present. At the meeting point, Kurapika had already placed a curse on Trollo. If he revealed any information about the Phantom Troupe, he would die. He had also sealed his Nen, leaving him completely powerless. Upon seeing Pakunoda, he imposed another condition, not to speak about what she was seeing. If either of them broke their vow, death would be instantaneous. Now, she was obliged to return and free the young men, while Kurapika would free Trollo at another location. She held a deep affection for her leader. She didn't want anything bad to happen to him. So, against the will of the rest of the troupe, she took Gon and Killua with her. On the way to the meeting point, they were intercepted by Hisoka. He called Kurapika, demanding to be allowed to accompany them, as he had always wanted to test his strength against Kororo. If he didn't allow it, he would kill Killua and Gon without hesitation. The blonde had no choice but to accept. They all traveled to the agreed location, an isolated desert. The exchange was made, and Hisoka was finally alone with Kororo. What he didn't know, however, was that Kororo could no longer use his Nen or fight. The disappointment was so great that Hisoka simply walked away. There was no point in testing his strength against a man stripped of his power. Upon returning to the base, Pakunoda did not sit idle. She transformed her memories into Nen bullets and fired them into her companions' heads, so they could know the whole truth. By breaking the binding vow Kurapika had imposed on her, she died. That was how they were able to understand what had happened and what Korulo meant to her. Korulo had united them, given them purpose and protection. To Pakunoda, he was someone worthy of respect, loyalty, and possibly love. When forced to choose between protecting him and telling the truth, she chose to die rather than put his life in danger or betray his trust. This bloody chapter closed. The young men resumed their search for copies of the game. However, when they went to the auction, they found 2 troop members there. They left quickly, but couldn't escape and were caught. To their surprise, the troop members told them they were not going to kill Kurapika. First, they would wait for Chrollo to be freed from his curse, as it was the Phantom Troupe's right to be the ones to kill him. In that state, another hidden condition imposed by Kurapika had been activated, and since Nen severely punishes those who break vows, they preferred not to risk it. With the echo of the auction fading, the young men found themselves at a crossroads. Their purchasing options were scarce, nearly non-existent, in the shadow of a millionaire named Batera, whose ambition was to acquire every existing copy of Greed Island, and indeed his fortune nearly allowed it. However, one singular lot broke the monotony of the event, a console with the game, but with a captive soul inside it. The owner of that copy, a player trapped in the virtual world, was auctioning his prison with a solemn condition. The buyer would have to commit to completing the game in full. This was the opening the young men had been looking for. They approached Batera, a man shielded by a wall of security and suspicion. Entry was restricted to hunters, and their youth was an obstacle. But Gon, with the audacity of those with nothing to lose, presented the memory card and the ring, the relics of his father. Batera's curiosity was piqued. They were brought before Tsezgera, one of his bodyguards, a hunter who had already conquered Greed Island and who was now helping his employer recruit new players. The rich man's objective was transparent and megalomaniacal: to bring items from the game into the real world, a feat requiring unimaginable Nen power. While this drama unfolded, in the shadows the Phantom Troupe was moving with their own agenda, stealing another copy of the game and plunging a pair of their members into its digital universe. Back in the real world, the young men dedicated themselves to forging a new special power before venturing into the game. Killua, with his innate brilliance, was advancing in leaps and bounds, leaving Gon struggling with his own learning curve. On a night of frustration, he decided to call his master Wing. The advice he received was useful, and Gon was quick to put it into practice. The next day, the reality of their separate missions imposed itself. Kurapika, still entangled in his web of infiltration, had to leave. Not wanting to interrupt Gon's training, he simply left, leaving a message with Leorio to pass on his regards. The day of the tryouts to enter Greed Island arrived. Gon found himself in the middle of a crowd of hunters, all eager to try their luck. Tsezgera, with a clinical eye, evaluated the power of each one, unhurried, taking as much time as was needed. When Killua's turn came, his performance left Tsezgera impressed. The speed with which he had mastered a new technique in such a short period of time was remarkable, and his entry was guaranteed. Gon, for his part, though by a more arduous path, also met the veteran hunters' demanding standards. In the end, only 32 hunters qualified. The news was shared with Leorio over a meal that served both as a celebration and a farewell. With a heavy heart, Leorio announced that he had decided to begin his own journey as a hunter, and left, leaving a void that only time could fill. The next day, the expedition began. Gon finally plunged into the world of Greed Island. There, a game character waited to welcome him. It explained that the objective was to gather a total of 100 cards, each with a specific power and a limited number of uses. But while demonstrating how to use them, the ring his father had left him activated, and a message echoed from the past. Ging's voice confessed to having created the game and asked him to enjoy it to the end in his own way. After this, Gon materialized in the waiting room where he was reunited with Killua. The calm of the reunion, however, was brutally interrupted by a surprise attack. No matter how hard Killua tried to escape the power of his attacker's cards, the impact was inevitable. Furious, he stood up, ready to eliminate the threat. But his opponent, upon glimpsing the darkness in his aura, fled in panic. After the confrontation, the two arrived at the first town, where a tournament among players was being organized. They decided to participate, but first sought a place to eat. That simple act earned them their first card. Luck seemed to smile on them, until a person's screams tore through the air. As they approached, they were confronted with the macabre scene of a murdered player. The question arose, was it the work of a card card's power. Another player approached and dismissed it with cutting coldness. No, that had been the work of another hunter's nen. The reality of the game was cruel. Some eliminated others for pure pleasure, and death in the game meant death in real life. The veteran, who already knew how to exit the game, invited them to join him, arguing that teamwork was fundamental. He explained that the 3 ways to obtain cards were through missions, trades, or theft. The latter, however, had become the most common method, as some cards, more powerful and rare, were coveted targets. Additionally, stealing avoided the expenditure of uses from one's own cards. It was then that he mentioned a name that echoed with terror throughout the game. Bomber, an assassin famous for the number of players he had killed using his nen, not the power of cards. The veteran took the young men to his team and revealed his plan, to steal cards but without harming their owners. The proposal clashed with Gon's principles. His father had told him to enjoy the game in his own way, and that way did not include stealing from anyone. They refused the offer and participated in the tournament, where they obtained several cards. However, as soon as they left, a group of delinquents stole everything they had won. Standing firm in his principles, Gon decided to head to the next town, determined to obtain cards the legitimate way. Meanwhile, the group the young men had left behind was now focusing its efforts on the search for one of the rarest and consequently most powerful cards the game had to offer. In parallel, the Phantom Troupe was also making its own progress, operating under the mistaken belief that the game was set at a physical location in the real world. Under this perspective, their plan was simple. They could seize the items Batera was seeking and bring them to the real world, without needing to finish the game, thus securing a fortune. The young men, for their part, continued their journey, unaware that they were being observed by a woman. She, watching them, recognized the immense potential they possessed and considered it a waste to let them perish in the game. So she offered to train them so they could survive the dangers that awaited them. The young men's initial hesitation dissolved the moment they learned she had been Wing's master. She introduced herself as Biscuit Kroger. When Gon asked what she was doing there, she mentioned she was searching for a precious gem of great value within the game. She turned the question back to Gon, who told her he was there in search of his father. Bisky's response was a surprise. She knew him. His father was one of the 5 strongest nen users in the world. Be that as it may, she assured them she would train them so they could one day find him. To begin training, she controlled a hunter who was wandering the area, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and used him as a training dummy. The first trial would end when the young men managed to defeat him. The task, which at first glance seemed simple, proved a monumental challenge. They couldn't even get close to him. However, with persistence, they succeeded, thus completing the first stage of their training. They then moved on to the second, in which Bisky provided them with tools and had them dig the earth as a physical exercise to strengthen their bodies. It was there that they learned the use of Shu, a nen technique that allows the extension of aura over an object, serving both to protect it and to strengthen it as a weapon, whether a sword, a stick, or a pair of yo-yos. With this new ability, their next trial consisted of hunting any type of monster until they learned to analyze a combat as it was unfolding. They practiced with every beast in the area until they felt comfortable. After that, she taught them Ko, a technique that concentrates all aura into a single part of the body, used to attack with maximum force, like a devastating punch. The disadvantage of this technique is that it leaves the rest of the body completely defenseless, making it risky. On the other hand, if 2 fighters use Ko and their powers collide, nothing will happen unless the difference in power is very great. In that case, the weaker person's body would be destroyed. To avoid such risk, a good cover for Ko is Ken. They practice these 2 techniques, raising their control over nen to a new level. But the training didn't stop there, as Bisky now planned to teach them Ryu. Having absorbed all of Bisky's general knowledge, from that point on, she would train each of them one at a time, according to their individual characteristics, since Gon is an enhancer and Killua a transmuter. The next part of the training, however, could only be carried out by hunters with a license. With that said, Killua left the game using one of the special cards to take the hunter exam, returning shortly after with his license, a mission the boy accomplished with success. Meanwhile, the group that had tried to recruit the young men had already gathered 90 of the 100 required cards. What they did not know was that among them hid an infiltrator known by the alias Bomber. His real name was Genthru. In a swift and treacherous move, he placed explosives on every member of the group, ordering them to hand over their cards under threat of death. They complied, and he stole every card they had, along with his 2 accomplices, who were also part of the group. However, one of the victims managed to escape and went to Bisky to warn her about what had happened. With the explosive still attached to his body, he stepped away, revealing himself to be a Nen user. With this rare technique, he managed to remove the explosives from his body in time, because despite Genthru already having the cards, he made good on his threat, causing the bodies of the entire group to explode into pieces. Upon learning of the massacre, Gon decided he had to stop Genthru. However, upon arriving at the area, he discovered it had been taken over by pirates. They were Razor and his 14 devils. Razor proved to be extremely skilled, continuing to steal cards and claim victims, among whom were Tsezguera himself and his team. Faced with this new challenge, the young men, with Killua now back, formed a group with the goal of obtaining the last cards they were missing. If they wanted to win those cards, they would have to face them in a series of disciplines. With this in mind, the young men decided to gather more people to take on their leader. Upon reviewing a book with the list of players present, they saw that one was named Krollo. The curiosity to know whether it was the Krollo they knew led them to use one of their cards to transport them to him. However, upon arriving at the location, they found Hisoka. He told them he was there with the intention of luring the Troupe and fighting them inside the game. He was not interested in winning it or obtaining cards. The truth, however, was something else. Krollo had sent Hisoka into the game to look for an exorcist who could free him from the vow he had made with Kurapika. What did Hisoka stand to gain from this? The opportunity, after Krollo freed himself from that vow, to fight against him at full power. Bisky, seeing an opportunity, asked him to join them. Hisoka, commenting that he was a little bored, accepted. With him in the group, they all returned to Razor's base. The arrival at Razor's base marked the beginning of a series of competitions in various disciplines. The young men's superiority over Razor's men was evident in several games until the final proposal was put on the table, a game of dodgeball. The first team to reach 8 points would win. Even before it began, Tsezguera's sharp perception detected the immensely potent aura of Razor, leading him to conclude that he must be one of the game's creators. Upon hearing this, Gon's curiosity was piqued, and he asked if he knew his father. Razor's response, upon recognizing Ging's son, was direct and laden with a challenge. "Your dad told me to go hard on you," and with those words, the game began. The speed with which Razor threw the balls was so impressive that the mere impact of his throws posed a serious threat to the physical integrity of his opponent. Tsezguera, one of the first to feel his strength, ended up gravely injured. The competition pressed on with brutal intensity. Bisky was eliminated, followed by Gon. However, the rules allowed each team to bring one player back, and Gon, driven by his determination not to lose in his father's game, returned to the field. The strategy was set. Killua would hold the ball, absorbing the initial impact, while Gon concentrated all his energy to prepare his devastating Nen technique, Jajanken. With a battle cry, he fired directly at Razor. The game's creator tried to catch the ball, but the force of Gon's technique was such that he could only deflect it, being projected out of the field and eliminated. However, using the same rule as Gon, he immediately returned to the game. From that moment on, there would be no second chances. The young men knew that their only hope lay in replicating Gon's technique. However, the execution hurt Killua's hands, which also absorbed part of the impact. Even so, Gon felt he could only do it if his friend held the ball, so Killua had to grit his teeth and endure whatever it took. But first, they had to survive Razor's next play. He charged his body with aura and launched the ball directly toward Gon. In a defensive formation, the young men lined up one behind the other, allowing Gon to withstand the impact and survive. After this, Gon prepared to repeat his technique. As he did so, Razor understood why he was Ging's son. The ball flew with full force in his direction, but this time he managed to resist it, leaving them the rebound. The rebound headed dangerously toward Gon, but the monumental effort of his last attack had left him completely exhausted, causing him to collapse on the ground. Defeat seemed imminent, but Hisoka's bungee gum intercepted the ball at the last instant. The force of the impact was such that his fingers broke, but he managed to return it. Razor tried to do the same, but the ball, impregnated with Hisoka's bungee gum, stuck to him. All that was left was to withstand the overwhelming force, but it ended up dragging him out of the field, sealing his defeat in the match and granting the young men the coveted Sword of Truth card. With the competition over, Hisoka pressed on with his secret mission, while the young men's plan went into action, materializing the moment Genthru established contact with Tsezguera. According to the data, he was in possession of the Sword of Truth card. What Genthru didn't know was that Tsezguera only had one copy. the original remained in Gon's possession. Even so, Tsezgora accepted the confrontation, informing Gon that he could only contain Genthru for 3 weeks. In that period, Gon would have to recover his strength and rest so he could finally take him down. He reminded him that Bomber had already eliminated many players, so he should not be underestimated. Defeating him was the only way to complete the game, since he held the majority of the cards. Immediately, Gon resumed his training with Bisky, who continued preparing him so he could withstand Genthru's special technique, the Little Flower. Meanwhile, Tsezgora maintained a constant attack and retreat tactic, using the power of a teleportation card. However, days later, the card reached its use limit, forcing Tsezgora to use another that removed him directly from the game to escape. Upon returning to Batera's mansion, he noticed that something was wrong. He soon learned that Mr. Batera had cancelled the Greed Island expedition. It turned out that Batera's motivation lay in his fiancée, who had been in a deep coma following an accident. His only hope of waking her was the power of the card Breath of Archangel. However, just days ago, she had passed away, taking with her all of Batera's reasons to continue his search in Greed Island. With that, Tsezgora and his companions would not be returning to the game. With no way to warn the young men inside, all they could do was trust that, sooner or later, they would figure out the situation. And so it was. Tsezgora had been out of the game so long that his data had been erased. Genthru, noticing the prolonged absence, deduced that his target would not be returning and, without hesitation, turned his attention to Gon. If Tsezgora didn't have the card, only Gon could. Upon arriving at the location, he ordered his men to fight Killua and Bisky. With calculated swiftness, the young men retreated into the dense foliage of a nearby forest, where they would separate to begin their individual confrontations. Bisky's confrontation with Bara unfolded in theatrical fashion. The facade of a helpless young girl she maintained crumbled, revealing her true form, a woman of imposing stature and defined muscles who, with disconcerting ease, subdued her opponent. Elsewhere in the forest, Killua realized that although his strength was superior, his adversary's aura was denser, making his blows potentially lethal. With tactical wisdom, he released an electric shock from his hands to stun him. But the man, resilient, could still fight. It was then that Killua resorted to his yo-yos, a gift from his brother, each weighing around 50 kilograms. With them, he finally managed to win. The only real threat that now remained was Genthru. Gon's fight was an exercise in caution and strategy. He distributed his aura across different parts of his body, imbuing his strikes with added power. However, Genthru was an experienced killer. During the battle, he quickly deduced that Gon's careful stance was due to his knowledge of his Little Flower technique, but it didn't concern him. With dangerous arrogance, he underestimated Gon, convinced he wouldn't even need to resort to his most lethal ability to defeat him. Gon, for his part, played the role of the weak newcomer, bait so Genthru wouldn't feel the need to reveal his trump card. However, Gon's pride spoke louder, and he began to demonstrate his true strength. Beyond what he had planned with Bisky, he had his own plan to defeat Genthru, using his technique against him and challenging him to use it. Genthru, astute, decided not to fall into the trap, but little by little he noticed that no matter how many blows he landed, Gon kept resisting. He then decided to use a small version of his technique to blow up his hands. Gon, however, covered them with Nen, a defense that led Genthru to deduce that Bisky must have trained him. Even so, Genthru devised a new tactic. He would feign that he was going to blow up his hand, so Gon would concentrate his defense on that extremity, but the blow was in reality aimed at his body. He repeated his strategy until he noticed that Gon remained calm, a calmness that led him to make a drastic decision: to use his Little Flower technique with both hands. One was enough to destroy a body. With two, the damage would only double. Bisky had also prepared Gon for that eventuality. However, once again, he decided to deviate from the plan to employ his own strategy. In a chilling sacrifice, Gon offered both his arms to connect a devastating kick on Genthru. His limbs exploded in a horrific manner, but it was part of his plan. The blow he dealt gave him the time needed to attack with his Jajanken technique. However, Genthru dodged by pure chance, tripping on the uneven terrain, and Gon's power dissipated into the air. Despite the setback, Gon didn't give up. Genthru continued striking until Gon used one of his cards to drench his opponent in gasoline. In this way, if he used his explosive technique, he himself would also explode. Immediately, Gon prepared his technique again, but this time his target was the ground. Genthru fell into the pit that opened beneath his feet, and Gon converted another card into a giant rock to crush him. He managed to dodge it by the skin of his teeth, but Gon quickly approached with a Jajanken at the ready. Before he could deliver it, Genthru, defeated and terrified, pleaded for mercy and forgiveness, a plea that Gon, in the end, accepted. With the bomber's threat neutralized, the young men captured him along with his helpers. They took possession of all the cards they had and used one of them to heal Gon's wounds and those of the rest of the group. Our friend's arms, once destroyed, regenerated completely thanks to the power of the card. With 99 cards in their possession, a final event was activated in the game. The young men received the announcement that to win the last card, they would have to pass a knowledge test. Gon, with his ingenuity, managed to pass the quiz, and so, finally, they gathered all 100 cards. After this, they were transported to a castle where they met two more of the game's creators. With a note of sadness, they informed Gon that his father was not there at that moment. However, as winners of the game, they had the right to return to the real world with the power of 3 of the game's cards. The chosen ones were the Sword of Truth card, the Blue Planet, and the Paladin's Necklace. Before returning, Gon had the opportunity to hear some stories about his father, and with that, they came out. However, Gon had chosen those cards for a very specific reason. It turned out that each player had a record of all the people they had met in the game. The first person Gon had seen in the game was Gorinu, but when examining his personal record, he noticed that the first person listed was named Nig. A light went on in his mind. If he rearranged the letters of that name, it spelled out his father's name, Ging. Gon assumed his father must have taken him to Greed Island as a baby, which was why his record appeared that way. With that revelation, he used the power of the cards to head directly to his father's location, and upon arriving with Killua, they saw his silhouette outlined in the distance. The approach revealed a figure that, at first glance, seemed to be the goal of the young men's long journey. However, it was not his father. An instinctive recoil took hold of them when the man advanced in their direction, in a gesture that seemed like an imminent attack. The reality, however, was different. He was, in fact, saving them from some Chimera Ants, carnivorous insects of an unknown ferocity. It was in that instant of chaos that Gon's memory ignited. That was the man who long ago had saved him from a fox on Whale Island. His name was Kite, and he revealed to Gon that it was Ging himself who had trained him to become a hunter. As a final test, Ging had challenged him to find him, a feat that Kite had eventually managed to achieve. With unexpected generosity, he offered to reveal Ging's location, but Gon refused. The desire to find his father by his own means was a flame that burned with too great an intensity. The conversation was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of Kite's companions. Bearing alarming news, they had found an ant's limb, but of a colossal size. The implication of the danger such a creature represented led them to search for it, and the discovery confirmed their worst fears. A giant ant queen, in the full process of giving birth to an army of warrior ants, with the birth of the future king imminent. The reproductive cycle of the Chimera ants was a macabre spectacle of nature. The queen, through a process known as phagonesis, devoured other creatures, absorbing their DNA to create her offspring. Tragedy descended on the region when the queen tasted human flesh, which quickly became her preferred food source. As a result, she began giving birth to ants with surprising intelligence, capable even of speech. One of them, named Colt, had been born from the genes of a child who in life had always cared for his sister. The queen, in a demonstration of perverse logic, made him a squad leader and ordered him to bring her more humans. What followed was an extermination, with countless human sacrifices to fuel the birth of the future Ant King. The young men arrived at NGL Neo-Green Life, the location where the giant limb had been found. However, the speed of the ants' evolution was frightening. More and more humanoid ants began to be born, developing distinct personalities and, in some cases, a bloodlust for pure pleasure. The humans on the island attempted a futile resistance, being decimated by a single ant squad. Among the victims were Pokolo and Ponzu, familiar faces from the Hunter exam. Although they had fought with their Nen techniques, they were gravely wounded. However, in a final act of desperation, Ponzu managed to send a distress message that was received by Kaite. Faced with the gravity of the situation, he sent 2 of his companions to alert the Hunter Association. The young men, upon receiving the message, understood the urgency of the threat. They couldn't wait. They had to eliminate the Queen's Nest before the king was born. On the way, they encountered an ant officer. The confrontation that followed allowed Kei to observe the strength and Nen mastery those 2 children already possessed. At the exact moment they were about to crush the ant, Colt intervened and saved her. They continued their incursion into enemy territory, until they were stopped by Hagia's squad, who proposed a series of one-on-one fights. The young men accepted the challenge, a decision that proved more in their favor than against, as they managed to eliminate their rivals, clearing the way for Kaite to subsequently sweep away the rest of the ants. The news of the crisis in NGL reached world leaders, who promptly contacted the Hunter Association. Chairman Netero accepted the mission and began assembling an elite team of hunters to head to the location. Urgency was, once again, the order of the day, as the ant's evolution was exponential. Ramot, the ant that Colt had saved from Killua and Gon, had not only recovered from his wounds, but could now use Nen, becoming an even greater threat. The situation worsened with the birth of Neferpito, whose aura was of a terrifying intensity. It didn't take long to detect the presence of an intruder. Poco, the royal guard, captured him, and with surgical coldness, opened his brain to extract all the secrets he knew about Nen, with the objective of distributing them among her people. At a stop before reaching the nest, Kaite revealed to Gon that his father had told him to give back his hunter's license when he found him. He had done so, but in the midst of the confusion, had forgotten to hand it over. He then passed it to Gon so he could return it to his father when he finally saw him. That was the last moment of peace they had. Neferpito's aura detected them at a distance. The attack was swift and devastating, resulting in Kaite losing an arm. Fury took hold of Gon, who prepared to fight, but Kaite ordered Killua to stop him. With one last plea, he begged them to flee. The two managed to escape. At the border of NGL, they saw the hunter unit arriving. It was Chairman Netero, Knov, and Morel Makernasi. Morel, with brutal candor, told the young men to leave, as they were not yet strong enough. Disappointment fell over them, but Gon, with unwavering faith, assured Killua that Kaite was fine. To be able to join the fight as hunters, however, they would have to pass a test, overcome Morel's two apprentices. To do that, they needed to train, and it was then that Bisky arrived to help them. She worked on Ren with them until they were ready for their first fight against Knucklebine. Meanwhile, in NGL, the strength of Neferpito surprised even the chairman himself. And to make matters worse, another great warrior had been born, Shayapuf. Furthermore, the use of Nen in combat had now become common practice among the ants. On the other side, the young men began their fight with Knuckle, while Morel's other apprentice, Shoot McMahon, watched closely. The fight dragged on for days, and it was during that time that Bisky noticed a worrying pattern. Gon always ended up using more power than Killua. She brought this to his attention, pointing out his tendency to always flee when faced with an enemy far more powerful than himself, instead of confronting it and developing his own power. Irritated, Bisky decided to wake up his determination through tough love. She gave Killua a task, ending with a cutting warning. If he didn't change his attitude, he would soon no longer be able to keep up with Gon. The next day, the young men fought again. Knuckle managed to hit Gon with his ability, Hakaware, also known as APR Ameriasebi Prophet Return. This technique attaches a counter to the enemy from the moment of impact. Every time his opponent uses Nen, that counter adds an aura debt along with interest. If that debt exceeds the opponent's remaining aura, they will be unable to use Nen for the following 30 days. Killua showed no improvement. He continued retreating every time he faced an opponent too powerful for him. After this, the young men lost, so they wouldn't feel discouraged. Morel's apprentices promised they would save Kaite. Gon was so frustrated that he couldn't hold back his tears. Killua, realizing he was no longer of much use to Gon, decided he would look after him while he couldn't use his Nen and then leave him in NGL. The hunters launched their attack. Morel emerged with his smokescreen to disorient the enemy, and Knov, with his ability, created portals that transported the ants to a room with Netero. There, he took care of eliminating them with his own hands. However, the enemy was not standing still. Neferpito had captured Kite and kept his body for experiments. While in the nest, the king had finally been born. Everyone came to behold him, but he showed no respect, not even for the queen. He eliminated 2 soldiers out of the simple curiosity of tasting dormant flesh, which he found disgusting. His royal guard, composed of Neferpito, Shayapuf, and Mentuthiopi, prostrated themselves before him, and the 4 abandoned the nest, leaving behind a wounded queen, witness to her son's cruelty. Colt, waving a white flag of peace, sought out Netero to ask for help. He requested doctors to save the queen. For Netero, it seemed like a good opportunity to advance. He accepted the alliance and sent a medical team. For his part, Colt warned Netero that he was no match for the king. The doctors could not save the queen. She, in her final moments, uttered the name she had given her son, the king, Maruem. After her death, a small being in the process of being born was found in her body. The squad leaders of the kingdom were not satisfied with the king due to what he had done to the queen, so they abandoned the nest and went their separate ways. Meanwhile, the king arrived at the Republic of East Gorto. There, they eliminated everyone and claimed the palace as their own. Thanks to the alliances, the hunters were able to confirm that Kaite was still alive and find him, though he was no longer the same after the ants' experiments. Even so, when Gon learned he was still alive, his joy was immense. He took the time to go out with Palm Siberia, another hunter who had not been able to go to NGL. Since Gon still could not use his Nen, Killua followed them to protect him from any danger. Suddenly, in their path, they encountered an officer named Ramote. During the fight, it was revealed that Illumi had placed a needle in Killua's brain when he was a child, without him knowing. The needle caused Killua, whenever he was faced with a far more powerful enemy, to flee automatically. Illuma claimed it was to protect him, but in reality it was to control him and hide his true potential. With this, Killua had grown up believing he was a coward in moments of high tension. But during his fight with this ant, he felt such enormous frustration in his body that the needle broke. And in that moment, he was able to release his full power. Now he could fight with all his might without feeling the need to escape. Later, they took Gon to see Kite. However, he seemed like a different person. No matter how much Gon spoke to him, he only struck him. For Gon, it was very painful to see him this way, and he swore he would bring him back to normal. Meanwhile, the Chimera Ant King set his plan in motion. The supreme leader of East Gorto invited the citizens to his palace to hold elections. As already known, this palace had been taken over by the king, and the leader who appeared on television was dead, being merely controlled by Neferpito's power. In this way, they would lure humans to the palace and use them as food. The hunters already knew the king had taken that palace. It had to be a trap, so they headed there. But first, the 30 days passed, and Gon's Nen returned. After this, he showed his determination and strength to Morel. The power he was able to see was even greater, as it was being fueled by the pain of having seen his friend in that state. Morel had no objections and decided to bring Gon on the mission, together with Killua. As a curious aside, we see that the Phantom Troupe also had to fight these ants, as a group of them had settled in their home, Meteor City, and we see that they, yes, managed to crush them like what they are, insects. In the convulsion of the combat zone, the young men's paths diverged. Killua, moved by an impulse to protect the innocent, tried to warn the citizens not to go to the palace. His actions, however, did not go unnoticed and quickly alerted the enemy forces. Soldiers controlled by the ants were sent to stop him. He disposed of them with his usual dexterity, until he came face to face with Captain Icalgo, a creature in the form of an octopus. Despite the rivalry between them, Killua saw in him a brilliant warrior. In another context, he confessed he would have liked to be his friend. These words, spoken in the heat of battle, echoed deeply within the octopus. The combat continued, and Killua fought to his last drop of blood, finally collapsing in exhaustion. The octopus, moved by his adversary's words, could not help but act with compassion and took him to a doctor. In another part of the battlefield, Gon was also forging an unlikely alliance, becoming friends with Meleron. He, also a Chimera Ant but with the form of a chameleon, had once been a squad leader, a position he had abandoned with the birth of the one he considered the idiot king. His appearance was no mere coincidence. He possessed the ability to camouflage himself, among which stood out a particularly useful technique called Perfect Plan, which allowed him to hide his presence as long as he could hold his breath, an invisibility he could extend to others with just a touch. Meanwhile, the king spent his time in board games against the best opponents that ridiculous country could offer him. His intelligence was overwhelming, and he eliminated each of his adversaries after defeating them until Kamugi appeared. She was the first to manage to defeat the king. Despite being blind, she earned his respect. They continued playing until the king, in an audacious wager, put his own arm on the line, convinced he would win the next game. She, in turn, bet her life. The king, intrigued, questioned the origin of such determination. Kamugi's response impacted him so deeply that he decided to cut off his own arm as an apology for having underestimated her resolve. She, however, did not want to witness such an act of self-mutilation. Well, not see, but she didn't want to hear it either. So the king ordered Neferpito to heal his arm immediately. The act of healing, however, diverted Neferpito's attention from protecting the castle, a breach that Knuckles seized to infiltrate. He began placing portals so more hunters could enter, but the diabolical aura of one of the 3 royal guards made him retreat. The impact of that aura was such that his mind collapsed, leaving him out of commission. In parallel, one of Morel's students, Palm, managed to infiltrate the palace, posing as one of the secretary's mistresses, the only human authorized to remain there. Her Nen ability, the Black Widow, allowed her to track any person she had seen before through a crystal ball. Her plan was simple: catch sight of the king and the royal guard, in order to then spy on them from outside. However, her disguise was discovered. Elsewhere, Killua woke up beside his new friend Ikalgo the octopus. He brought him along to Gon and the rest of the hunters to draw up a plan to infiltrate the palace. The strategy involved waiting for the king's royal guard, so that Chairman Netero could fight him alone. Meanwhile, a subtle change was beginning to operate within the king. The time spent with Komugi was awakening in him a glimpse of humanity. He tried to kill her coldly, as he would have done with anyone else, but he couldn't. It hurt him. The next day, citizens began flocking to the palace. Shayapov used his abilities to hypnotize them, forcing them to head toward the trap. However, the hunters already had a plan in motion. They prepared to use the portals Konov had left behind, and entered the palace. At the same time, Zeno, Zoldyck, and Chairman Netero arrived at the war zone, making a spectacular entrance into the palace. Zeno deliberately drew Neferpito's attention, launching a Nen dragon that transformed into hundreds of meteors. Neferpito dodged them, searching for her attackers amid the rain of projectiles, while Shayapov, the other royal guard, sought the king to protect him. In the midst of the chaos, Netero managed to spot Neferpito and, with a precise attack, knocked her out of the way so he could go after the king. She clung on so as not to fall too far from the palace, but felt the approach of the enemy to her sovereign. She headed there quickly, but upon arriving was confronted with a terrifying scene. Komugi lay with a mortal wound, victim of Zeno and Netero's colossal attack. The king remained by her side. The hunter's surprise was immense upon seeing someone like him concerned with a human's life, and not an ant's. The king passed between the chairman and Zeno with an aura that paralyzed them, ordering Neferpito to save Komugi, and telling Netero to follow him if he wanted to fight. Beside them, the young men continued to advance. Gon and Killua separated from the group to confront Neferpito, while Ikalgo departed with the mission of finding Palm. Morel opened a path directly to Shayapuf, and the rest of the hunters remained to face Mentuthuyoppi. The young men managed to find Neferpito. Gon noticed she was healing Komugi. Upon seeing her saving someone's life, his fury reignited, reminding him of what she had done to his friend. She begged Gon to let her save her. His only desire was to avenge Katai, but he had to stop when she told him only she could heal his friend. With that said, Gon stationed himself in front of her, determined to ensure that the first thing she would do when she finished was bring back his friend. The fury of the battle against Mentuthuyoppi continued to sap the hunter's strength. Shoot, already gravely injured, could barely stay on his feet. It was then that Mentuthuyoppi, in an act of overwhelming power, generated a massive explosion from his own body. Knuckle, by the skin of his teeth, managed to survive. Seeing the royal guard slightly wounded, he advanced to deliver the killing blow. But it was a trap. The creature recovered in an instant, ready to eliminate them, but was suddenly paralyzed by Killua's crackling electricity. Free from his mental shackles, he could now use all his strength, and with it he unleashed his ultimate technique, Godspeed. What followed was a display of divine speed. Mentuthuyoppi was subjected to a torrent of blows. It was so fast that not even he could tell where they were coming from. Before he could make any reaction, Meliron activated his ability, concealing his companion's presence. Inside the palace, Morel kept Shayapuf imprisoned in his technique, the smoky jail. However, the royal guard's cunning prevailed and he managed to escape. The hunters were beginning to lose control of the situation. For his part, Mentuthuyoppi had recovered from Killua's attack, and the fight he was waging against Knuckle merged with another. The royal guard ultimately developed a final and terrible form, defeating all the smoke puppets Morel had created. With that same force, he also defeated Morel himself. Knuckle, upon seeing his companions wounded and on the verge of death, decided to negotiate. He had placed on Mentuthuyoppi the same technique he had used on Gon, which would prevent him from using his aura for 30 days. He offered to remove it if he spared everyone's lives. Mentuthuyoppi, confident in his superiority, and not considering Knuckle a threat, accepted the deal. Freed from the curse, he set off in search of his king. Far from the palace, the king argued with the chairman, claiming that his reign would benefit the entire world. Netero, however, was not persuaded. The battle began. But first, in another scene, Killua found Palm. She had been imprisoned in a cocoon and upon emerging had been converted into a kind of chimera soldier. Killua found himself forced to confront her. However, what truly struck her and brought her back to normal was not the force of his blows, but the sincerity of his feelings. His words, laden with the determination and affection he showed for her and for Gon, caused Palm to recover her consciousness and remember who she really was, managing to master her human side. After this, both set off to reunite with the remaining team members. Netero, with his power, created an enormous hole in the ground, beginning the combat. The king, with disconcerting calm, merely observed his attacks. Netero increased the power of his blows, but it was useless. With terrifying speed, the king cut off 2 of the chairman's limbs. It was then that he used his most powerful attack, the Zero Hand of Guanyin, Bodhisattva. The attack finally managed to cause some damage to the king, but it was still not enough. With this, Netero's aura was exhausted. He was spent. The king, noticing his state, tried to speak with him again. He told him that his effort had moved him, and that, just for that, he would allow humans to live in a special zone on Earth. However, Netero refused to accept such a fate for his species and, in a final act of defiance, used another supreme technique while uttering the king's name, a name the queen had given him, Meruem. Once activated, his body generated a colossal explosion that enveloped the entire area, affecting the king himself as well. His guards, upon seeing him in danger, flew quickly in his direction and, without hesitation, gave him all the aura they possessed to save him. The king recovered his power. He was even stronger than before and returned to the palace. However, he remembered nothing. Shayapuf, noticing his sovereign's amnesia, took advantage of the situation. He did not want the king to remember Komugi and recover his humanity. Inside the palace, Neferpito finished her healing. Gon forced her to come with him so they could heal his friend, while asking the rest of the team to take Komugi as a hostage. The king was still on his way. Shayapuf sent his small clones to hide Komugi, but upon not finding her, merely hid the game board they played on. Even so, he sent one of them to look for her and discovered what was happening. He called Neferpito and made her believe he had recovered Komugi. She, thinking she no longer had reasons to obey Gon, simply told him that Kaite was dead and that there was nothing to be done. Gon, upon hearing these words, broke down in tears, deeply hurt. After this, the clone asked the young men to return Komugi and Neferpito to him. Otherwise, Neferpito would kill Gon. Killua, furious, eliminated the clone. He asked Palm to look after Komugi and went after his friend. There, Gon's frustration was growing uncontrollably. His emotions began to release themselves in the form of a dark aura, triggering a transformation. In it, we could see Gon in his adult version, an ability similar to Bisky's. Being more mature, he told Neferpito, "Let's fight outside." She accepted. She thought she had everything under control, but Gon, beside himself, killed that insect with a single blow. His strength was tremendous. The scene that presented itself to Killua was one of incomprehensible desolation. He arrived without understanding what was happening, finding only his friend crying. But there was something different about him, an aura he didn't recognize. The tragedy, however, was far from over. The monster that resided in Neferpito's Nen, in one last manifestation of posthumous malice, controlled her inert body and tore off one of Gon's arms. He didn't flinch. With terrifying calm, he simply slammed her into the ground using just one arm, and applied a Jajinken of such magnitude that the explosion that followed was colossal. In the palace, Shayapuf noticed with alarm that the king could recover his memories through images and words. At that, a memory of Neferpito surfaced, along with the vague recollection of a favor she had asked of him, something about healing someone. The memory was hazy, so he ordered her to be brought to him. While waiting, he used his Nen to capture 2 hunters who were in the vicinity. After this, the king deduced he was being hidden from something. He ordered Shayapuf to tell him immediately, but suddenly both began to bleed. It was the delayed effect of Netero's technique. His explosion had been more than a simple attack. It had spread an insidious poison that was now running through all of their systems. Even so, the king continued searching for the truth being hidden from him, until, after enveloping everyone with his killing aura, he was told the name Komugi. Upon hearing it, he remembered everything. Shortly after, all the royal guards died, victims of the poison. Meruem, aware that his own end was near, approached Palm. He told her he surrendered, but only asked her to tell him where Komugi was. She revealed her location to him. After this, Meruem found her. They shared their final moments together, for the king's body was so infected that his mere proximity contaminated her with the poison. However, Komugi was at peace with the idea. No one could cure either of them now. They only wanted to be together. And after this, King Meruem died, and she did so shortly after. Following their deaths, the remaining ants scattered across the world in search of a place where they could live peacefully. They informed Morel that the last baby removed from the queen's body was growing, and that he himself had chosen to be called Kaite. Meanwhile, Gon was in critical condition due to his use of the transformation. The doctors no longer knew what to do. Killua, however, departed, declaring he would find a way to save him. At the Hunter Association, 12 imposing figures known as the Zodiacs convened. With the chairman's death, they would have to choose who would replace him. There were 12 of them, and among them was Ging, Gon's father. He, along with Parston Hill, put himself forward for the position of chairman. The rest of the members would vote for one or the other. However, the election would not be restricted to them. The other 661 professional hunters from around the world had to come and vote for one of the candidates. The day of the vote arrived. Among the crowd, very familiar faces could be seen. There, Illumi approached Hisoka to tell him that Killua and Gon were in danger of dying. Killua had returned home to ask his father's permission to see his sister, Aluka, a request that, to many people's surprise, his father granted. Inside Aluka lived Nanika, an unknown entity capable of granting any wish. However, before doing so, Nanika would ask for 3 simple things, like a pat or a hug. If the person fulfilled those requests, Nanika in return would grant the wish without fail. But if someone refused or failed at Nanika's requests, she would kill the close circle of the person who failed. Furthermore, the more difficult the wish, the more difficult the requests she would make, condemning practically everyone close to that person to death. Illumi told Hisoka that the wish Killua would ask of her would be to save Gon. This would make Aluka's request impossible to fulfill, and many would die as a consequence. Killua was already with her. He fulfilled the wishes she asked of him. At that moment, he forced his father to let him leave home, threatening his mother's life. He needed to do this because Aluka had to touch the person she was going to heal. His father was not idle about it. He put his son on alert level 4, which meant he would be pursued by the butlers. They would have the task of bringing him back if he broke one of the restrictions, that Killua must remain close to his sister at all times, and that no stranger must know about Aluka's power. The butlers approached them. It was then that Aluka's danger manifested. She asked her butler, Tsubone, to give her a fingernail, a request she fulfilled immediately before the entity eliminated her loved ones. But after this, Tsubone observed them from a distance to avoid risks. At the hospital, Leorio discovers Gon's condition. He was genuinely worried. He couldn't reach Kurapika, so he went to the Hunter Association to ask Ging directly, face to face, why he still hadn't visited his friend. Ging replied that Gon could manage on his own. Leorio, furious and out of control, attacked him. All the voters saw it. They liked what he did so much that they voted for Leorio, leaving him as the 3rd favorite to become chairman of the association. Outside, Killua continued to advance toward Gon. However, Illumi and Hisoka continued their plan to stop him. The car they were in was flipped. From a distance, Killua sensed his brother's killing aura. After this, he used his Godspeed technique to escape. The butlers went after him, while one stayed to fight Hisoka. The butler managed to surprise Hisoka, but ultimately was eliminated. But the young men got ahead. Killua and his sister managed to escape in an aircraft. His brother saw him. He had no intention of losing him, so he began distributing his needles to make innocent people follow his orders. In this way, he reached his brother. However, he was not alone. Tsubone fulfilled Aluka's 3 requests, and out came Nanika. With this, first Killua asked her to heal Tsubone's hand. There we see that Nanika cannot make impossible requests after having healed someone, which means she would be able to heal Gon without needing to then ask for something impossible to fulfill, and many having to die. Illumi, upon learning of this, left for the time being. The next day, we see that only 4 candidates for the association chairmanship remain. Among them, Leorio. The popularity he was accumulating was such that he made it to the final alongside Pariston. This despite confessing that he only wants to be chairman to heal his friend. Killua arrives at the hospital. He asks Nanika to please heal his friend. He tells her that if she does, he will always protect her. With this, she begins to heal Gon. The amount of aura that emanated was surprising to everyone, and Illumi took notice. At the election, Leorio was giving a speech, but was interrupted by Gon himself, who came to show everyone he was well. With him safe, Leorio had no reasons to be chairman, so he stepped down. Behind him, in the distance, he sees his father. Ging approaches him and asks his forgiveness for not having been able to help Kite. His father simply orders him to go and apologize to Kite and then come and see him. Kite's body had been used by the ants to create a new chimera, but thanks to his powerful nen and will, Kite managed to preserve his consciousness inside this new body, reborn in the form of a young female chimera. Although his appearance changed, he retained his memories, personality, and human abilities intact. After this, Pariston wins. Immediately he names Cheddle Yorkshire as vice chairwoman, and he steps down from the position. All that pleases him is creating disorder and putting people to the test, so he left. Illumi, after having seen all of his sister's aura, decides to take care of her, but Killua refuses. He uses his sister's power to send him home, and as a final wish, asks that Nanika not appear again. She agrees, but when Aluka returns, she tells her brother to apologize to Nanika because she is a part of her being, and Killua had promised to protect her, meaning Nanika as well. Killua acknowledges she is right. Nanika comes back out, and he apologizes to both of them, so that they can now return home, reconciled as siblings. Gon arrives where Kite is. He apologizes for not having been able to be strong enough. Kite tells him it's alright, and that they can continue to be friends, and that he should go and meet his father. After that, Gon looks for him, but upon arriving, only finds a note that reads, "I'll be waiting for you at the World Tree." He goes with Killua to the base of the tree. His father was waiting for him at the top, but it seemed to them like a good place to say their goodbyes. Killua and Gon promised to stay in touch, and that they would always be friends. So Killua sets off to begin his travels separately, while Gon climbs the tree until he finds his father. At the top, Ging tells him why he became a hunter, so he could enter the tomb of a royal family. However, he now understands that the friends and the journey he went through to reach his goal were better than the goal itself. He shares that he now plans to go to another world, but doesn't yet have the requirements. Whatever the case, he asks his son to always enjoy the journey, and not to think he will only be happy when he reaches the end of his goal. Gon returns his hunter's license to him. After this, the two share stories and have their first father and son moment for the first time under the moon. On Whale Island, Mito receives a letter from Gon, and through it she can learn that Gon had finally found his father. Here is the full summary of the Hunter x Hunter anime. What an incredible show. It's impossible to watch it and not become a fan. When I watched it, I was fascinated by the universe, the powers, and the characters. I hope you enjoyed the summary, because it took a lot of work. It was weeks of writing the script, recording, and editing. If you can leave a like and a comment, it helps a lot in getting the video to more people and making this wonderful series even more popular. Subscribe to the channel because here we are 100% focused on summaries. Also, 2 more summaries are showing on screen right now. Click and watch them.